Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku had pro-hero parents part 1. If you guys enjoy this what if and want to see part 2, comment down below. And let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content and leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story 𝗧𝗵𝗲 from 𝗓3. So let's start the video. And you missed our turn, Aizawa said in his monotone voice, while looking on his phone's GPS. What? No, I didn't, Hisashi said. Wait, I did, didn't I? He said in defeat and turned the car around. Why are you nervous? We're just gonna go and get some info in the adoption center. We don't have to decide right away. Aizawa looked out of the window of the car. It was a sunny day with some clouds in the sky. I know, but we've been giving this a lot of thought, and we're ready for it now. And we probably will get to meet some kids, right? Said Hisashi, a little more relaxed now. Yeah, Aizawa said with a little smile on his face. After 10 minutes, which felt like an eternity, they finally arrived at the adoption center. It was nothing fancy, a 2-story building that was made out of grayish bricks, and the grass was starting to overgrow a little bit. But the tile pad was visibly to walk over. Aizawa held a piece of paper tight in his hand with the necessary information on their appointment. Hisashi saw that his husband was very calm, unlike himself. His hands were starting to sweat. He hoped he didn't have to shake someone's hand. The door opened, and a young woman opened the door with a bright smile. Hi. My name is 𝗓𝗓. How can I help you? The woman, now known as 𝗓𝗓, said. We made an appointment a few weeks ago. My name is Shota Aizawa, and this is my husband. Yamada. Hisashi Yamada, the blonde interrupted. Oh yes, come inside please, she said, and let them inside. I see you brought the papers, 𝗓𝗓 said, looking at Aizawa. Oh yay. Here, we were told to fill them in already so adoption could go smoothly. 𝗓𝗓 took the papers, and they walked into a medium-sized office. It fitted a desk in the middle, and a comfy teal-colored couch with sand-toned cushions. All in all, it looked kinda homey. You can take a seat, she pointed at the 2 chairs that were standing in front of the desk. At the moment, we have a few children here. We can go say hello later if you two want to, she said, looking at her computer. Then looking back at them with a smile. Ah yay, Hisashi said over exited. Aizawa glared at him for shouting in his ear, sorry. He laughed and rubbed his neck in shame. 𝗓𝗓 smiled at the couple. They are going to make great parents. They overviewed the papers, and she asked them some questions about their lives, like what they did for job, and they also had a USB stick with some photos of their house, so she could see if it was safe and good for a child to live there. You have a very beautiful house, she smiled at the 2 in front of her. Thanks. It took a lot of time to renovate it, but it was worth the effort. Hisashi smiled. It was hard not to shout his excitement out. 𝗓𝗓 typed out the last bits of information and smiled. Well, I have some good news. You both come in recommendation for our adoption policy, she said with a smile, happy for the couple. Shota and Hisashi smiled at each other, and the blonde put his hand over his husband's. We can go say hello to some of the children now, and maybe you see someone that could be a good match for you too, 𝗓𝗓 explained to them. They walked out of the office. They have creative learning right now, so they're all in the common room, she said while she got a phone call. I got to take this call for a sec. You can go ahead and talk to some of the children. They both stood there looking at each other, and then around the room. Hisashi walked forward and tried to talk to some of the children. A little girl started to show her drawing and explained what it was. Shota looked around the room and saw a little boy sitting alone on the floor and looked like he was playing with some colored blocks. He walked over to him and crouched down. The boy looked up at him and back at the blocks like they were more interesting. Hey kid, Aizawa said with a soft voice. The kid had fluffy green hair and big green eyes. He looked to be around the age of 4. Hello, mister, he said in a high-pitched voice. What's your name? Aizawa asked him. Izuku Midoriya, sir, he said, now keeping his focus on the man with black hair in front of him. Why are you sitting here alone, instead of with the other children? Aizawa asked. Well, mister, the other children don't like me very much, he said like it was the most normal thing in the world. Aizawa looked concerned about the kid, and then Hisashi joined them. Well, who is this little fella Zawa? He asked them. This is Izuku Midoriya. Zashi, he said, pointing at the boy. Can I ask you something, mister? Midoriya asked. Hisashi was beaming with joy. With how cute Midoriya is. Sure, Aizawa said. Why did you come to me out of all the other kids? When the big people come here, they never want to talk to me, always the other kids, he asked, and the couple looked shocked at each other. Well, you seemed nice, Aizawa said. And besides, they don't look as cool as you, he whispered after. That made the little boy giggle. The 2 adults spent another 20 minutes talking to Midoriya. It's official, they had both fallen in love with a green-haired ray of sunshine. The green-haired boy just had to come out of his shell, which he eventually did. I'm so sorry that call took a while longer than I expected, 𝐎𝐸 said while putting her phone back in her pocket. I see you've met Midoriya. She turned to the green-haired boy. Can I speak with these two gentlemen, sweetie? Midoriya nodded and went over to the couch where some of the other children were watching TV. And have you talked to some of the children? She asked. Yes, they're all so unique in their own way and nice as well, Hisashi said. Well, I just talked to Midoriya. He looked to be the nicest of them all, Aizawa said with no shame at all. His husband quickly put his hands in front of the black-haired man. He doesn't mean it that way, the blonde tried to explain. Yes, I did, Aizawa said with a straight face. 𝐎𝐸 smiled. I understand, you can't like all the children. Midoriya stood out to you, completely understandable. She smiled. The blonde wiped the sweat of his brow and smiled. The three of them walked back to the office and sat down again. They both looked at each other and then back at 𝐎𝐸. I think we've made our decision, Hisashi said with a big smile. So you're going with Midoriya? 𝐎𝐸 asked with a small but happy smile. Finally, the boy would have a loving family. They both nodded. Can I ask a question first? Aizawa asked. Sure, go ahead. How did he end up here? Aizawa asked, showing a little bit of sadness in his voice. Well, all I know is that the apartment building he lived in burned down. There lived a guy in the building that had a meth lab, and it exploded. It was in the newspapers a few months ago, she explained, sympathy written over her face. Oh yay, I remember that, Yamada cut in. 𝐎𝐸 continued. The firefighters pulled him out of the fire, and he was in the hospital for a few days due to smoke inhalation. He also had some second-degree burns on his upper arm. He has to wear a compression sleeve. But we found out that he saw his parents die gruesomely in that fire. And he still has bad nightmares and was diagnosed with PTSD. But his past doesn't make him a bad child, she explained to them. They were silent for a minute, but Aizawa fisted his hands and looked up with a determined face. We will adopt him and take great care of him, he said, and his husband nodded. He'll get the two most amazing, lovingly parents in the whole world, the blonde said with glassy eyes. They filled in the necessary papers and signed them. When they opened the door to get out of the office, something immediately clung to his leg. He looked down only to see green fluffy hair, and smiled. Izuku was listening to the conversation the whole time. He looked up to Aizawa with tears streaming down his face. Why, you really want T to adopt me? Hisashi picked the kid up in his arms and wiped away his tears. Of course, little listener, and you're gonna have the best dads in the entire world. Midoriya giggled and hugged the blonde tightly with his little arms. A few weeks later, Aizawa stopped the car in front of the adoption center again. They both looked at each other. The couple could finally take Midoriya home with them. The two of them walked over to the door and rang the bell. 𝐎𝐸 opened the door with and exited Izuku next to her. He was wearing some black pants with a green striped shirt and a yellow cap and a yellow backpack. Izuku smiled at them and ran up to them and hugged both of their legs. You came back for me. Hisashi bit his lip, smiled wobbly and blinked back tears. He promised himself that he wouldn't cry today. So Shota took over and kneeled down. Of course, kid, we'll never leave you, and ruffled his hair. Izuku nodded and bit his lip, happy tears streaming silently over his cheeks. They talked to 𝐎𝐸 for a bit, exchanging contacts, because she would stop by to check on Midoriya to see if he was adapting to his new home. Hisashi picked Izuku up while Aizawa carried his backpack to the car and put it in the trunk. Meanwhile, Yamada put Izuku in the child seat that they bought the prior day. Everyone was now in the car, and before they left, the couple looked back at Izuku. You ready, kid? Aizawa asked. Yes, sir, Izuku smiled. You can call me 𝐬𝐴, Hisashi said. You can call me whatever you're comfortable with, kid, Shota said with the slightest smile on his face. Okay, 𝐬𝐴, and 𝐬𝐴, he smiled. The car ride home was not quiet at all. 𝐬𝐴 put on the music he liked and taught it to Izuku while singing the lyrics. After an hour on the road, they arrived at their house. Izuku was mind-blown when 𝐬𝐴 picked him out of the child safety seat and put him on the ground. Is this where I'll be living? He asked, flabbergasted. Yep, 𝐬𝐴 said as he swung Izuku's backpack over his shoulder. 𝐬𝐴 grabbed his hand, and they started walking to the big house. Aizawa opened the door and let his husband and now son walk in. Welcome to your new house, kid. Izuku walked inside and looked around in awe. The house had a modern look and had an open atmosphere. They also had floor-to-ceiling windows. It's so big, he exclaimed, while his hands touched his face and ran around giving everything a good look. Aizawa and Hisashi smiled at the sight. You want to see your room, little listener? Hisashi asked. To which Izuku nodded eagerly, all right. He picked the green-haired boy up, put him in his neck and started to walk up the stairs, Aizawa following close. They stopped in front of a door and Hisashi put the boy down and opened the door. Izuku cautiously walked inside and looked around. Aizawa went to stand next to his husband. We didn't decorate it, because we wanted to give you the opportunity to do it yourself, he said. But if you want, we'll always be glad to help. Hisashi piped in. Izuku smiled. Thank you. I will make this the best room in the entire world, he smiled. After a house tour they decided what they wanted to eat. Of course they let Izuku decide. Can we eat katsudon? The boy asked, fumbling with his fingers and looking down. Of course, baby. I have the best recipe for that, Hisashi said, and walked over to the kitchen. They're not yours. You stole them from my mother when we were there last time. Shota deadpanned. The blonde decided to ignore his husband and Izuku giggled. After dinner they watched a movie to which Midoriya fell asleep too. So Aizawa had to carry him to his room and tucked him in. After that the couple also went to bed. The next morning Hisashi woke up and opened his eyes, only to see two big green eyes staring into his. Wow, good morning little listener, he smiled while stretching. He looked to the other side of the bed where his partner slept, but found it empty. Zawa asked me to come get you. He made pancakes. Izuku smiled with closed eyes, and his head tilted to the side. Pancakes, you say? Izuku nodded his head. Chup. Hisashi sat up. Okay, I'll be down in a sec, he said to the boy while ruffling his hair. Okay. Midoriya jumped off the bed and ran downstairs. He told me he'll be down in a sec, Midoriya said, while taking a seat at the table. All right, Aizawa said while putting a pancake in front of Izuku, and gave him a kiss on his fluffy hair, and went back to making the pancakes. Midoriya smiled at the gesture. It reminded him of his mom. She always did that too. A few minutes later Hisashi came down the stairs, and went over to his husband to give him a kiss, and take a pancake. He sat down in front of Midoriya. So, does he make the best pancakes or what? Hisashi said, while stuffing the pancake in his mouth. Yes, Midoriya said, also with a full mouth. Please swallow, before you two decide to talk, Aizawa said, a little disgust creeping in his voice. Sorry, Zawa, Izuku said, after he swallowed a pancake piece. Okay, I'll forgive you, he smiled, and pointed at Izuku. Shota picked up his spatula to flip another pancake. But you, he said, looking at his partner while pointing the spatula at the blonde. Not so easily, Shota said while he sat down next to Izuku. What? However can you forgive me, my dear Prince Shota? He said with pleading eyes. If you do the dishes, servant, Aizawa said, pointing with his fork that had a piece of pancake on it, only to put it in his mouth a second later. Hisashi crossed his arms. Fine. The interaction made Izuku giggle. After said dishes were done, they put Izuku in the car and decided to go shopping for him. It was Izuku's first time at the mall, and he was having a blast. After the first minutes they were there, Izuku started running off to things he saw. So after that Hisashi decided to hold his hand so he wouldn't get lost. They bought him some clothes and some room decorations. By sunset they had their hands full with stuff for their little ray of sunshine. The ride home Hisashi looked back at Izuku and saw that he was fast asleep in his seat. Awa, he is sleeping, Hisashi cooed, and Shota looked in the rear view mirror and smiled. They had already eaten at the mall, so Hisashi put Midoriya immediately in his bed. They would unpack everything tomorrow and decorate. Tomorrow was also the last day of summer vacation, so that meant that they still had to enroll him into a school. And which also meant that they both were going to have fresh first years in UA. That should be fun, right? No. Aizawa hated first-year students. Some of them were too obsessed with themselves. Hopefully this year will be different. The next day was filled with helping decorate Izuku's room. He had a lot of All Might stuff, posters, and things like that. Hisashi was putting the last poster up when Shota walked inside the room and leaned against the doorframe. Well, kid, you just became a student of Aldera Preschool. Shota couldn't believe that Midoriya was going to be 5 years old in a few weeks. Izuku smiled at the new information. I can't wait. I'm going to make tons of new friends. Zawa and Zashi smiled at the sight, when a knock on the door interrupted the moment. I'll go see who it is, Shota said. He went downstairs and opened the door. Oh. It's you, he said with no emotion in his voice. Oh. Hey, Eraserhead, do you mind if I come in for a second? Said none other than Toshinori Yagi, also known as All Might. Yes. Yes, I do mind, he said with a serious face, when the beaming voice of his husband came from behind him. Of course we don't mind, he yelled, and Shota looked annoyed. He didn't want to be bothered with school stuff right now. He had one last day before that hell began. Well, I just had one question for tomorrow, since it's my first day at UA, All Might explained. And why? Did you have to come to us for this? There are plenty of other teachers. He said monotone. Well, your house is the closest. He said with a smile. I guess it's time to move then, 𝐲𝗧𝗏 said with a sigh, before walking away and let his husband deal with the situation. They were talking in the living room about how tomorrow would go. Well, Hisashi was doing all the talking. 𝐲𝗧𝗏 was forced to listen. When someone came running down the stairs, Zashi, you have to come look. My room, it's finally done. Izuku said, stopping at the last step, looking at the skinny blonde man that was on the couch. They stared at each other for a few seconds, when All Might spoke. Oh, sorry, I didn't know you had a son, he said, but more like a question. Izuku walked up to the couch, sat down and hid behind 𝐲𝗧𝗏. He was still shy when it came to people he didn't know. Yay, we adopted the little guy a few weeks ago. But he has been here for 2 days, Hisashi said. Wow, I didn't know you guys were looking into adoption. I'm glad you did because he is super cute, All Might said with a smile. Izuku smiled and buried his face deeper in Aizawa's shoulder. So, what's your name? All Might questioned. Izuku peeked from behind 𝐲𝗧𝗏's shoulder and whispered. Izuku, sir. Even though it was quiet, All Might still heard it. Wow, you have a beautiful name, young Izuku. He said with a kind smile. Thank you, sir. He said back, hiding in his previous spot. Oh, you can call me All Might, young Izuku. That sparkled Izuku's interest. He stood up in the couch and leaned on his 𝐲𝗧𝗏's shoulders. Wait, you're All Might? He shouted. The one and only, kid, he said, spreading his arms. But you don't look like him, he said with a questioning look. All Might looked down and panicked. He forgot he was still in his normal form, and quickly transformed in his muscle form and said his well-known catchphrase, I am here. Izuku's eyes sparkled with happiness, while Aizawa rolled his eyes. Well, it's time for bed, little man, Aizawa said, picking him up and prompting him up on his hip. But I want to keep talking to All Might, and I'm not tired yet, he said while letting out a big yawn. Your yawn says otherwise, 𝐲𝗏𝗏 said, while taking the boy upstairs. Bye, little man, have a good night rest, Toshinori said, waving at the kid. I'm sure we'll meet again, pretty soon. 𝐲𝗏𝗏 glared at him and walked upstairs. No way in hell was he gonna let Izuku close to that buffoon anytime soon. All Might turned back in his normal form. Sometimes I forget him still in this skinny form, and I can't keep one for all up for long. I've already used it today, he said, looking down. Don't worry, friend, Izu won't tell anyone. They stood up. I hope we've answered your question, Hisashi asked while walking towards the door. Yay, thanks, give 𝐲𝗏𝗏 my regards. He smiled and waved goodbye. Will do, mighty. Later that night, 𝐲𝗏𝗏 was woken up by someone calling his name. Zawa. It was above a whisper, but still quiet. He turned on his lamp and saw Izuku standing on his side of the bed. He glanced at his alarm. It showed 2:30 am. Is something wrong, Izu? He asked, and Izuku nodded. I had a bad dream. Can I sleep with you? 𝐲𝗏𝗏 smiled softly and patted the spot between him and Hisashi. Of course, Izu. Izuku climbed onto the large bed and laid down between his caretakers. 𝐲𝗏𝗏 turned the lamp off and put his arm around Izuku. Good night, Izu, he said while closing his eyes. Good night, Dad, Izuku said with a tired voice. 𝐲𝗏𝗏's eyes opened when he heard Izuku say that. He gave him a kiss on his hair and hugged his son close during the night. The following morning, everyone was getting ready. They had to go to Izuku's new school to get his uniform, so they had to leave a little early because Aizawa and Hisashi had to welcome the first years in UA. Aizawa was already downstairs drinking his coffee and Hisashi was helping Izuku get ready for the day. And then it dawned to Aizawa, does Midoriya have his quirk already? He should probably ask him. How did they not ask this already? He is already 4 years after all. He wanted to take another sip from his coffee when his husband and son came down the stairs. Hisashi put Midoriya in his chair. So Izu, we haven't had the chance and kinda forgot, but do you have your quirk already? Aizawa asked. Meanwhile, Hisashi made a shocked face that they forgot to ask him. I don't know. We never went to the doctor to see if I have one. And I haven't done anything special, so I don't think so, Midoriya said, while munching on some fruit that Hisashi had cut yesterday. Oh, well, how about we go to the doctor when school's done? Aizawa suggested. Okay, he said with a smile. 10 minutes later, the family was in the car ready for the beginning of the school year. They walked into the office of Midoriya's new school and were met with a man. He had a nameplate on his shirt pinned which spelled Colin. Hey there, how can I help you? He asked them. They decided to let Hisashi do the talking because Aizawa could come off as a bit rude. My husband called yesterday about a last-minute registration for our son here. He smiled. Oh yes, of course. Wait, aren't you two the pro heroes Eraserhead and Present Mike? He asked, a little bit of excitement sparkling in his eyes. Aizawa rolled his eyes. Yes, that's us. Hisashi kinda yelled. Wow, I didn't know you had a son. Colin asked. Well Hisashi was cut off by Aizawa. Can we move this along? I have a very boring day ahead of me, he deadpanned. Of course, sorry, Colin said while bowing. He gave Izuku his uniform. It was a light blue shirt and a yellow star with a white circle in it hanging on his left side up to his shoulder, and some dark grayish pants, and of course he would be wearing his red shoes. Aizawa looked down to where his son held his hand. Hisashi was discussing some basic school stuff with the other guy. Izuku was talking less than usual, so he bent down and looked Izuku in the eyes. Hey, what's wrong, problem child? He said in a soft tone. Nothing. He threw his arms around Aizawa's neck and hugged him. Aizawa was shocked for a second, but gave a mini smile and hugged Izuku back. He whispered something in his dad's ear. I'm just gonna miss you, Izuku said with tears coming in the corners of his eyes. Aizawa hugged Izuku a little tighter, now that he knew why the boy was so quiet. He let go of Izuku and held his shoulders. He had to give a good example for his son. Can I tell you a little secret? To which Izuku nodded. We're gonna miss you too, so you have to be strong for us, you know? Can you do that? Aizawa said with a gentle smile on his face. Izuku wiped his tears away and nodded. Yes, I can do that, he said while a smile formed on his lips. All right, I knew you could, said Aizawa whilst giving a box to Izuku's shoulder with a smile. Just then Hisashi came back. You ready to go, Shota? He said, while Aizawa got up from his sitting position. Yay, I'm ready. Hisashi gave Izuku a hug. See you after school, little listener. Izuku gave them a little wave. And just like that his parents disappeared behind the corner. He hugged his uniform closer. And that's how his first day at his new school started. He got changed and Colin led the way to his class. The other kids were already in the classroom, sitting in a circle introducing themselves. Hey, sorry to bother your class, but I got a new student with me. The tall man next to Izuku said. Oh, welcome, come join the circle, young man. Izuku looked up at Colin with a questioning look. Colin smiled at Midoriya and nodded, and pushed him a little farther in the classroom, and closed the door. Izuku audible gulped and stepped forward and sat down next to the other children. So what's your name, little one? Izuku made eye contact with the whole class and stated, Izuku Midoriya. He said a little unsure. Hello, Izuku. His whole class said in sync, which made Izuku smile, and a girl raised her hand, and the teacher nodded to voice her question. What is your quirk? Everyone nodded at the question. I don't have one. Yet. But I'm going to the doctor after school, Izuku rambled. His class nodded in understanding. And so the day continued. Aizawa stood for his class door 1A. He thought he heard some yelling inside the class, so that meant these problem children were already there. He looked up and sighed. He walked in the classroom, and some of the teens didn't notice him walking in. He was at the front of the class. Some children noticed and went quiet, others didn't. Aizawa looked down a little and back up, while his hair flew up and his eyes glowing red. Quiet, he kind of yelled. When he did that, everyone ran to their place and sat down. He started to walk to the door and spoke. Meet me outside in 10 minutes with your gym clothes on, he said in his monotone voice. The class nodded and started to get up. Said 10 minutes later, everyone was outside on some sort of dust field. What are we going to do here, Mr. Aizawa? A boy with red spiky hair said. What's your name? Aizawa asked. Ijiro Kirishima. Sir, Kirishima said. Well, Kirishima, we'll be testing your quirks today, to see how far you children are with it. We'll begin with this. He held up a baseball. You will be throwing it while using your quirks. The one with the lowest score will be expelled. Aizawa smiled sinister. The whole class gasped in fear. He then looked at a boy with blonde hair that had a scowl on his face. Bakugo, you finished at the top of the practical exam, right? Aizawa asked. Bakugo nodded. Then you try first. He gave the ball and Bakugo stepped forward. The black-haired teacher picked a little device out of nowhere and switched it on. Bakugo threw the ball in the air while screaming, "Die!" at it. The result of his throw showed on the device, and he showed it to the class. 705. 2 meters, next, he said. The whole class threw the ball with their quirks. Just one person hasn't done it yet. You, with the purple hair. It's your turn. Everyone stepped aside to look at the person with purple hair. Shinso, you're next, Aizawa said, pointing at him to come to the front of the class. He walked to his teacher and picked the ball up from his hand. Mr. Aizawa, I don't have a strength-related quirk. My throw won't do much, he said, looking disappointed at the ball. Aizawa turned around and walked over to the rest of the class. Remember what I said at the beginning of this exercise, he said. Yay, to use our quirks, Shinso deadpanned. Well then, use your quirk. He looked at the ball and back at the class. Hey 𝐎𝐻𝐢𝐫, your quirk is zero gravity, right? He asked her. Yes, why? And suddenly her eyes turned white. Shinso gave a little smirk. Throw the ball for me, he said to her, and she obeyed. Aizawa's little machine showed the infinity logo again. Shinso released her from his brainwashing, and she looked confused. Hey, that's not fair, Bakugo yelled. Aizawa walked back to the school. I did say to use your quirks today. That's what everyone did. Now get changed and go eat your lunch. And so he walked inside. While passing the principal and Hisashi, they both looked dumbfounded. Hisashi followed his husband, ready to go eat lunch, with Nezu on Hisashi's shoulder. Wait, so who got expelled? Mina asked. No one. He was just messing with us, Todoroki said with no emotion in his voice. While walking to the changing room, everyone followed to their respective locker room. So how's class 1A? Because I have them after lunch break, All Might asked. They're all problem children, just as I expected, Aizawa said in a serious tone. Oh come on Shota, they can't be that bad, All Might said while smacking Aizawa on the shoulder, who in return sent him a dead glare. Anyway, the blonde said while sitting next to his fellow teacher. How's that little man of you two doing? He asked with his famous smile. None of your business, Aizawa said, while biting into his sandwich. Oh come on Zawa. Don't be mean, he's just curious how Izu is doing. His husband yelled. Oh, who were you guys talking about? A woman's voice cut in. Our son. Hisashi smiled while wrapping his arm around Aizawa. Awa. I didn't know you guys had a son. That kinda turns me on. Midnight smiled seductively. Please. Don't, Aizawa said with a repellent face. Well, I have to meet him. Does he go to UA? She asked. He's 4 inches, Aizawa deadpanned. So. It'd take that as a no, to which the dark-haired man rolled his eyes. The whole lunchtime the teachers asked questions about Izuku. And then the bell rang. Can't even enjoy my sandwich in peace, Aizawa said, and standing up to go to his next class. The whole class arrived back in the classroom, but were met with All Might. Some students showed interest, while others didn't. Follow me to ground, beta young ones, All Might smiled. After the first duo went, the whole building was destroyed. Young Bakugo, you did not pass this exercise. Can someone from class tell us why? All Might asked. Well, he put a big explosion inside the building, Jiru said. He almost killed our classmate, Kaminari said. Shut up, you fake-ass Pikachu, Bakugo yelled. Calm down, young Bakugo. Well, class, I think we've had enough training for today. Go get changed, and you can go home for today, All Might said. When Hisashi and Aizawa arrived at Izuku's school, he was waiting in front of the gate with a large drawing in his hand. Zawa, Zashi. He ran up to the car and Hisashi stepped out of the car. The hug Midoriya. What's that, little listener? He asked Midoriya. I made a drawing of the 3 of us, he showed Zashi. Wow, did you make this? It's very artistic, he said with a smile. They got in the car and drove to the hospital to get Midoriya checked for his quirk. He was beaming with happiness. He never thought about what quirk he would get, so he was also a bit nervous. They sat in the waiting room waiting for the doctor to call his name. After 15 minutes an old man came inside the room and called, Izuku, Midoriya. He looked around the room only to find the family of 3. Oh, I guess you're the last ones of today. They got up and followed the doctor. They did the test and were now waiting in the doctor's office. He came back in with a smile on his face and went to sit down. So Aizawa asked, and the doctor looked through his papers. Well, normally Midoriya should have a quirk. Hisashi smiled at Midoriya and ruffled through his hair, to which he giggled. But why has he showed no signs of having one yet? Aizawa asked. Well, I see in his file that he was recently adopted by you too. The couple nodded. Well, in some cases the quirk has yet to be activated. He's already 4 years old, so I can't take that long anymore. The doctor tried to explain. So you're just a late bloomer, Midoriya. He smiled at the boy. After saying their thanks to the doctor, they left and went straight to their house. Ate some dinner. After dinner, Midoriya ran up to his parents. Papa, can I play outside? He asked, already holding his shoes. Of course. Wait, what did you just call me? Hisashi asked, pure joy in his voice. Papa, is it bad that I did that? He asked, scared that he made a mistake. Hisashi picked him up and twirled around with Midoriya and gave him a little kiss on the nose. No, please call me Papa. It brings so much happiness to me. Midoriya giggled and said, okay. Hisashi put him back on the ground and Midoriya ran outside with a football. Did you hear that, Shota? He called me Papa. He yelled. Yes, I heard. He called me Dad last night. Aizawa deadpanned while looking at their son. Wait, why didn't you tell me? He whined. Because it was the middle of the night. They were now both looking outside and Hisashi pulled Aizawa closer to him. He put his head in his husband's shoulder, and they both smiled. Suddenly Midoriya sneezed and disappeared from their sight. The couple's eyes widened and ran outside only to not find Izuku. Where is he? Hisashi yelled. I don't know, he just disappeared. Aizawa yelled back. Papa, Dad. The couple turned around to see Midoriya inside. I got my quirk, he yelled. Aizawa and Hizashi looked at each other with relief, and then fear. Oh no, he can teleport, they said at the same time. They both ran inside and Hizashi picked Izuku up and inspected him to see if he was okay. I guess that Dr. Visit spiked his quirk. He yelled, to which Izuku giggled. So how do you activate it, Izu? Aizawa asked while ruffling the greenet's hair. I don't know, I just sneezed, and then I was inside, Izuku said with his arms in the air and looking surprised but happy. Okay, well, now that you got your quirk, we could maybe help you control it. Huh, little listener? Hizashi asked. Yes, please, Izuku yelled. After that, it was time for Izuku to go to bed, so Hizashi carried him to his room and put him in bed. Papa? He asked before Hizashi could leave the room. Yes, Izu, he said while sitting next to Izuku on the bed. Do you think I can become a hero now that I have my quirk? Izuku asked while rubbing his eyes and giving a little yawn. Of course you can become a hero, little listener. And Dad and I will help you every step of the way, he said in a proud and exciting tone. Izuku smiled. Okay, good night, Papa, I love you, Izuku said, while closing his eyes. I love you too, Izuku, he said while standing up and giving a little kiss on Izuku's forehead. The next morning went as its usual way, except for when Izuku teleported in his seat. Morning, Dad, Izuku spoke and scared Aizawa. How, when did you get here? He said while putting his coffee next to Izuku and sitting down himself. Well, I really concentrated on my seat here and teleported here, he tried to explain. All right. So you have to know where the place is when you use your quirk? His dad asked. I think so. But I can't go very far yet because my head starts to hurt, then Izuku said, while putting his hand on his head. Oh, okay. So don't overdo it just yet, you just got it, Aizawa said while ruffling the boy's hair. Okay, Midoriya said while giggling. All right, eat your breakfast, we need to leave for school in a few. After he dropped Izuku off at his school, he drove to Yua, and his day at school already started bad. His husband had a free period the first hour, so he would come in later, and there were stupid reporters at the entrance of the school, and were interviewing some of his students. They were asking questions about All Might. Of course. He was already irritated that the #1 hero was a teacher here, and now he brought even more attention to the school. He pushed his students in the school, and a female reporter wanted to follow him. But that choice slapped her literally in the face when the steel doors came up. She made angry sounds, to which Aizawa gave a smirk. And just like that, Aizawa was in his classroom again with the loud teenagers. As soon as the bell rang, Aizawa wanted nothing more than be at home in his bed. All right, class, before I start today's lesson, you first need to choose a class representative. So wake me up when you have chosen someone. And just like that, Aizawa could catch some sleep. Okay, I say we take votes, Mina exclaimed. Who wants to be the class rep? And everyone put their hands up except for Shinso. He didn't like to be in the spotlight very much. Ooh. This isn't gonna work, she said. How about write a name on a piece of paper, and the person with the most votes wins, Takoyami said. Everyone voiced their approval and started to write. But you can't write your own name, he deadpanned after that. Everyone ugged and threw away their piece of papers. Idiot, Spec, Hugo mumbled under his breath and put his paper in the box. Soon after, the rest followed. After the counting, it turned out that Ida got the most votes, and then Momo, so she became the deputy representative. Aizawa woke up from his nap and saw 2 students standing at the front. So they've chosen someone. All right, I see you've chosen a class rep. Good. He looked at the clock and started walking towards the door. All right, it's lunchtime. And so he was of the teacher's break room. Aren't we supposed to leave the class first? Tsuyu asked, and the rest of the class shrugged. Everyone was enjoying their lunch. Ida, Uraraka, Todoroki, and Shinso were talking among themselves when suddenly the school's alarm blasted in their ears. Basically, everyone covered their ears in the cafeteria. Some started to panic and ran into the hallways, which created a domino effect, and soon everyone else was panicking in the hallway. And it was overflowing with scared students. Aizawa was talking to his husband when the alarm blared in the teacher's lounge. All the teachers abandoned what they were doing and ran outside to protect the students from potential evil, Aizawa and Hizashi following suit after the other teachers. The hallways were cramped with students trying to get out of the school. Aizawa stopped a student and asked, "What's going on, problem child?" The student looked scared, but still answered, "I heard some other students say they saw a villain in the east hallways." Aizawa looked at Hizashi, and they both nodded. "Go find safety." Aizawa let the student go. He looked behind him and saw All Might and Midnight also asking questions to some students, and the couple ran over to them. "A student just told me that there could be a possible villain in the building," Aizawa explained. "Same here. But how is that possible? The defense system worked this morning." Then the teachers heard a student yell reassuring words. "Who's that?" Midnight asked. "That's Ida, my class rep," he said in his monotone voice. "Why is he above the door?" All Might asked. "I have no idea," he said. But the students calmed down because of him so the teachers could search the east hallway. The students were all gathered on the grass field, and some teachers watching them. Nezu stood at the front on a podium when the 4 teachers came back from the school search. Nezu looked at them, and they all shook their head. No, so no villain, he said. No, we couldn't find a trace of a villain ever setting foot in the building, Midnight said. Well, for the safety of the students, I guess it's best to let them go home. They've got quite the scare today. The teachers nodded, and Nezu said what needed to be said, and soon everyone was going home. Izuku, on the other hand, had a full day of school, but filled with nice games, and he showed his new quirk to his classmates. So now he could participate in the quirk lessons. He did some little jumps from across the room, so at the end of the day he was tired. The bell rang, and the children were running outside to go home, but Izuku's teacher stopped him. Wow, Midoriya, you've made some great progress with your quirk enhancement today. She smiled, and gave him a piece of paper. Thank you, miss. He looked at the paper. What's this? His teacher smiled and explained. Well, since you've got your quirk, now your parents can fill in and sign the quirk paper. They have to explain what your quirk's capacity is. She smiled and patted his head. All right. He looked at the paper and walked outside. He saw his papa waiting outside of the gate, and there were some mothers talking to him. He saw that because they were holding their children in their arms, and his papa looked uncomfortable, so Izuku put his mean face on and ran towards his papa. Hey, leave my papa alone, he said with an annoyed voice. The woman's cooed at him. Awa, is this your son present, Mike? She asked. Yay, so we should get going now, he said, clearly annoyed. But we were having such a nice conversation, the other woman said. This made Izuku even angrier and grabbed his papa's hand and dragged him away from the lovesick woman. Thanks, little listener. He picked Izuku up and ran towards the car because it started to rain, and he didn't want to get wet. Izuku sat in the car and looked at the 2 front seats. But he didn't saw his dad. Normally, they would both pick him up from school because Yua ended a little earlier. Hisashi got behind the wheel. Where's Dad? Izuku pouted. Dad is at home. School ended a little earlier. Izuku looked confused. Why? Hisashi began to drive and continued. Well, there was an alarm at school and some students thought they saw a villain. But we searched the school and found nothing. But Nezu let everyone go home early, Hisashi explained. He looked in the rear-view mirror and saw Midoriya listen attentively. Were you scared, Papa? Hisashi chuckled a bit. Of course I was scared, he said, taking a turn with the car. Why? He asked. Well, heroes can also be scared sometimes when we come in a situation that we don't know anything of. The situation can take a bad turn. But we have to put on a brave face so that the people have some hope left. If they see that their hero is not afraid, they won't be so scared. So we push our fear to the side and put on a brave face. You get it, little listener, Hisashi explained. Yes, I understand. Was Dad scared? Hisashi laughed. I don't think your dad has the ability to be afraid, Hisashi laughed as he pulled into the driveway. Izuku laughed. Yay, Dad is afraid of nothing. He smiled. Hisashi picked him up and carried him inside. He put Izuku down, and he ran towards his dad and hugged his leg. Are you okay, Dad? Aizawa smiled and turned away from the stove. Of course, I'm fine. He picked Izuku up and prompted him up on his hip. Papa told me what happened at school today about the villain thingy, Izuku said while hugging his dad. Well, everything turned out to be okay. He looked at his husband and smiled. He was setting the table because they would eat soon. Do you promise you will never get hurt when a villain would attack? Aizawa looked a little sad, but Izuku didn't see because he was still hugging him. He couldn't promise Izuku that. You never know what can happen when a villain decides to attack. But his son looked a little upset about what happened today. I promise I will never get hurt, Izu. And hugged Izuku a little tighter. Hopefully he could keep that promise. The car stopped Izuku's school. Do you have the papers? Hisashi asked, setting him down on the ground and giving his backpack. Let me check. He opened his little backpack and saw the envelope with the papers. Yup, he said with a bright smile. The bell hadn't rang yet, so Aizawa stepped out of the car to give him a kiss. Dad. Aizawa looked at him and HMD at him. Papa was talking about the sports festival at Yua, Izuku was saying with an uncertain face. Yes. Aizawa didn't know where this conversation was going. Can I come watch, pretty please? He begged his dad. Don't you have school yourself? Aizawa asked. It's on a Saturday, Zawa, Hisashi cut in. Izuku crossed his arms. Papa already said I could come, he stated with a cute pout on his lips. Aizawa glared at his husband. Since when don't we discuss these subjects anymore? He said, crossing his arms. It was too early to have this conversation. Well, he began, but Izuku cut him off. You promised me, he said, stomping one leg on the ground. Hisashi sighed. Izuku was about to throw a tantrum, so he looked pleadingly at his husband, and Aizawa rolled his eyes. Fine, you can come and watch. Izuku smiled and jumped up and down in excitement, absolutely forgetting the anger he just felt. But you're staying with us. Your papa will have to present the festival, so I will keep him company, and you can keep me company, Aizawa said, narrowing his eyes and a small smile. Okay, Izuku said without a problem. Okay. He looked at the time while his husband and son high-fived each other. School was about to begin, so they said their goodbyes and left themselves. Aizawa was going to the 𝐬𝐽 facility today with his class to test what they would do in certain situations. Can we please discuss these kind of situations in the future, please? Now I looked like the bad guy if I said no, Aizawa said, while turning the car and began driving to 𝐬𝐽. Okay, I'm sorry, Aizawa, I just got so excited that he wanted to come look at what the students could do that I forgot. And I totally said yes without thinking. I'm just not used to this, you know, Hisashi said with a kind smile looking at his husband. Aizawa was feeling bad, he saw it, so he didn't want to make the situation worse than it already was by pissing him off more. Okay, glad we could work this out, Aizawa said also with a small smile. His husband was rubbing off on him. He smiled more these days because of him. The students were already waiting eagerly by the bus, of course. Who wouldn't? They didn't really have lessons today, only cool action. Well, at least Aizawa was gonna let these problem children work for it. He gave his husband a kiss and opened his door to get out when Hisashi stopped him by the arm. Are you mad at me, Aizawa? Hisashi asked. Aizawa wasn't an idiot. He saw that Hisashi was beating himself up way more than he should. What? No, Hisashi, look. Now that we're parents, we have to make decisions together. And I admit we made a mistake the first time. But mistakes are bound to happen. No one said raising a child was going to be easy and going to be perfect all the time. And now we can learn from this mistake and not do it in the future. Okay? Aizawa sucked in a large breath. He did not have the energy to talk so much in the morning, let alone in a whole day. Hisashi smiled. Thanks, you know you're actually really good at this. Aizawa looked confused. At what? Hisashi let out a small laugh, cheering me up. Aizawa got red for a second and wanted to say something when someone ticked on his window. Hey, Mr. Aizawa, can we leave now? We don't want to be late, Ida said while doing these weird hand motions. Maybe one of his parents was an aircraft marshal. Anyway, he waved goodbye to his husband and reminded him to get Izuku from school because he didn't know when he would get back until Hisashi couldn't hear him anymore because that student was leading him to the bus. They arrived at the 𝐬𝐽 and everyone was looking at it with wonder or admiration. And then there were some that didn't care. They stood in front of the bus and were greeted with Space Hero 13. She greeted the students, and then they walked inside. Wow, Kirishima breather out 13 stood in front of Class 1A and started to say what there was at the 𝐬𝐽 facility. Shipwrecks, mudslides, fires and storms and much more, to be prepared for any kind of disaster. I built this facility to which you all know as Unforeseen Simulation Joint, or in short 𝐬𝐽. She put her hands in the air as a happy gesture. Aizawa looked around and put on his annoyed face. 13 wasn't All Might supposed to meet us here? He asked. She came a little closer and whispered, well, about that, apparently he already did some hero work this morning and kind of ran out of his power juice, so he's resting at the teacher's lounge back at 𝐬𝐽. She explained. Aizawa rolled his eyes. Of course. He turned back to the class. But he heard something suspicious and turned around. His eyes went wide when he saw a purple portal coming out of a fountain. He stepped back and looked at the other pro hero. Protect the students, he yelled. Class 1A was shocked at the sudden yelling from their teacher and looked at where he was looking. Kirishima walked a little forward and put his hand above his eyes like a Captain Matter and squinted his eyes. Hey, this looks a bit like the entrance exam. Bakugo stood next to him and looked frustrated at the teachers. You didn't say we were already beginning, he yelled. That's because this isn't part of it. Get back. The black-haired teacher yelled. The students immediately listened and stepped back. Aizawa took his yellow goggles and put them on. These are real villains, aren't they, Mr. Aizawa? Shinso said, no fear whatsoever in his eyes. That's what they were training for, right? Fighting villains. Aizawa looked at the student and nodded, but looked back at the man that came out of the purple portal. He had a hand on his face and red tubes coming out of his neck, where other hands were connected. And next to him stepped out a huge bird with his brains visible. At that point, Aizawa knew it. These weren't some small-time villains, this was the real deal. No way this is happening for real. How did they even get into the school? They're villains. Kirishima yelled at no one in particular. Momo stepped forward and walked over to 13. What about the censors? Shouldn't they alert the other heroes that there are villains here? She said, kinda panicked. They were not trained yet enough for this situation. Heck. For no situation, she thought. What if they planned to come here? That means they prepared for this. They must be jamming the communications, probably some villain with a quirk that could do this. Todoroki started and looked down at where the villains came closer to the stairs. And we're here in an isolated part of the main school building, right on the time that our class is here. They may be some low-life villains, but they thought this trough, so we can't underestimate them, Todoroki said in his usual calm voice. The rest of the class looked a little shocked from their classmates' reasoning. Aizawa thought that now was the best time to come up with a plan. He looked at his colleague. We need to start evacuation. We can't keep the students here, it's too dangerous. And tried to contact the school. Even if these villains are jamming the communication, it doesn't hurt to try it anyway. He looked at Kaminari. Kaminari tried to contact the school with your quirk as well. Kaminari nodded and immediately tried. Aizawa stepped forward ready to go down and fight these scumbags when Ida spoke up. Sir, you can't fight those villains on your own. Even we can see that there are way too many of them, he said, doing these hand gestures again, probably to make his point stronger. Aizawa looked back at his students. I wouldn't be much of a hero if I didn't have some tricks up on my sleeve. Just try to get the other heroes to get here as fast as possible. And just like that, Aizawa jumped down the stairs and started to fight these lowlifes, erasing their quirks and picking them up with his scarf, throwing them away or knocking them unconscious. It was actually really impressive to see him defeating all these villains. Ida grunted. Okay, class, we should get out of here while we still can. They nodded and started to run to the door when suddenly that stupid purple gate opened in front of them. A person came out of it. I mean, even if you could call this a person, he had the body of a human, but his head was like this big purple flame. Not good, almost everyone thought. Where is your beloved number one hero, All Might? He said in quite a normal voice. So that's why you're here, for All Might. 13 pointed an accusing finger at the man in front of them. The man decided to ignore the space hero and continued. So where is he? He said while pausing dramatically between his words, doing groceries for his sick grandma. Bakugo yelled while launching at the villain. The villain dodged and said, You think this is a joke, child? The next person to attack was Kirishima. He tried to punch the guy. Keyword tried, but flew right through him. That pissed the villain off and put his warp gate over the students and spread them over the facility where there were of course other villains. Ida pushed Uraraka and Sato out of the purple mass with his super speed. He heard some student scream while the portal was doing its job. When it faded, his classmates were gone. Shinso was not standing on the ground anymore, but was falling out of the sky. Yes, the fricking sky. He looked down and saw water. He screamed his lungs out and hit the water. After him came Tsuyu. She hit the water and immediately started to swim towards Shinso. And after that came Mainta, crying like a little baby. Shinso was deep in the water. He was frantically swimming up. He saw something coming closer and squinted his eyes, and his cheeks puffed with air. His eyes widened when he saw a shark-like creature swimming towards him. He screamed and tried to protect himself by putting his arms in a cross for his face. But then came Tsuyu and kicked the damn shark. Shinso, she called, and wrapped her tongue around him and swam to the surface. Mainta was already at the surface, waving his arms in the air, and he was still crying. Tsuyu grabbed him and swam towards the giant boat and started to climb it and put Shinso down first. Then Mainta, but he hugged her upper body and made a perverse comment about her, so she just dropped him on the deck. Thanks, Tsuyu, Shinso said, standing up. You're welcome, Ribbit. She smiled with a little piece of her tongue sticking out. Meanwhile, on the mudslide was Todoroki alone, fighting and freezing at least a dozen villains. He smirked and said, Pathetic. Losing against one student. Bakugo and Kirishima were in the collapse zone, also fighting some villains. Momo, Jiro and Kaminari were in the mountain zone. Ojiro was alone in the fire zone. Takoyami and Koda in the storm zone, and the rest of class 10 was still at the top of the stairs. They were all fighting different kind of villains. They thought this through and put them in the right place with the quirk that some villains had. Aizawa was throwing his scarf at yet another villain. And when what he thought was the boss came running towards him, Aizawa wrapped his scarf around him and pulled him closer and elbowed him in the stomach. But the handman grabbed his elbow and leaned in closer. You keep doing the same attacks, and when your hair falls down it means you're not using your quirk, he said while leaning in closer. He put all his fingers around his elbow, and it started to disintegrate till you could see the muscles. Of course he didn't want to lose his whole freaking elbow, so he pushed the blue-haired man off of him, and 3 other villains thought this was the best moment to attack him again. Aizawa used his quirk again, but he was getting tired. He looked at his arm, and it hurt to move it, so it hung lifeless next to his body. But he kept fighting those villains, even if he was too tired. Aizawa had to protect his students. He looked at the top of the stairs and grunted, when are the other pro heroes coming? He looked back at villain with the hands over his whole body. He grabbed his scarf and his hair was yet again flying in the air. What's your name, villain? Aizawa yelled. Shigaraki, at your service. He bowed and continued. You're better than I expected, hero. I could almost say you're cool for beating all these useless human beings. But unfortunately, I am not the end boss. He started laughing. And then a shadow came over Aizawa. He looked behind him, and that big-ass bird was now standing there. Aizawa couldn't react in time because of the shock, and the beast hit him in the face. His blood flew around in the air together with his yellow goggles. He fell on the ground face first, and was disoriented. The beast grabbed his arm and twisted it in an unnatural way. Behold the power of my Namu, Shigaraki yelled. When the Namu broke Aizawa's arm, he cried out in pain. He had to do something. This thing must have a strength enhancement quirk, so he just had to erase it, so he could get away and fight in a better position. So Aizawa looked behind him at the beast and activated his quirk. eyes red and hair flying, but to no success. Now the 𝗵𝗲 broke his other arm. Aizawa cried again in pain. Damn it, Aizawa thought. This thing doesn't have a quirk. Then the 𝗵𝗲 grabbed his head and slammed it into the ground before he passed out. His last thoughts were about his husband and son. Ōzashi was going to kill him for fighting these villains alone. The purple man teleported next to Shigaraki. One of the children with a speed quirk got away, probably to go warn the other pro heroes. This made the blue-haired villain mad. We can't fight hundreds of pro heroes. We have to leave now, Shigaraki spoke in an angry voice. The other man just nodded. He looked at the water and gave a sinister smile. But we still have some time to inflict some damage. And looked right at Shinso, Tsuyu and Mainta. They were watching the fight between the 𝗵𝗲 and their teacher. Out of the water they landed in. He went right for Shinso's head, and everything went in slow motion for him. Tsuyu looked at him and remembered what happened to their teacher, his elbow, when this villain touched that. And she didn't want that to happen to Shinso, so without giving it a second thought she threw her tongue at the blue-haired villain's arm and yanked him away. The 𝗵𝗲 saw his master being thrown into the air. He looked down and smashed Aizawa's head into the ground for good measure, and a pool of blood started to run from Aizawa's body. The 𝗵𝗲 stood up and caught Shigaraki. That damn frog. I'm going to murder her, he yelled. The bird put his master down and ran towards the frog girl, picked her up, brought his arm down to smash her skull in. Everything was still going in slow motion for Shinso, and he began stretching his arm to save Tsuyu, while Shigaraki put both his arms out and ready to disintegrate both the students. Then there was a loud bang coming from the top of the stairs. Smoke started to fall down because of the impact. The villains stopped both their movements. Shigaraki smiled. Evil, All Might, he said. All Might stepped forward and stopped at the beginning of the stairs and yelled, I am here. The students cried out in happiness, some actually crying. Shigaraki looked at the students standing next to him. The fun can continue, he said in a manically voice. All Might came rushing down and picked Aizawa up, who was still unconscious, and looked at Shigaraki and sprinted towards him, and took the 3 students up and put them safely aside. He looked at them. Get Mr. Aizawa to safety. I can handle it from here. They nodded, and Tsuyu and Shinso picked Aizawa up, some on his legs and the other under his armpits. It took a while to get him upstairs, but they got there eventually. The other students came rushing to them and Xiaoji took him over. That must have been so scary to be down there. Are you guys okay? Mina asked them. Yes, we'll be alright, but I'm more worried about Aizawa. We saw him getting hurt real bad with that bird person. Everyone stared down at the fight that was going on between the 𝗵𝗲 and All Might. Present Mike stormed Nezu's office in with an anxious look on his face. There were some teachers standing or sitting down. Everyone turned around with a sorrow look on their face, and Nezu began to speak. I guess you are also here because of what you heard about us, G. He stated with his paws hands against each other. Ah yeah, he said, a little anger in his voice. Well, we still aren't available to contact 13. Nezu began but got interrupted by Hizashi. What do you mean you've not been able to contact them? There is always someone available to answer. What if something is wrong there? My husband is there. He was getting mad now. Mike, calm down. All Might is on his way there right now, and he was going to let us know, Midnight said. And right at that moment, the phone in Nezu's office rang. Everyone looked at it with wide eyes. Well, pick up. Hizashi yelled, and so Nezu did, and he put it on speaker. Hello, he said, and the voice of Kaminari broke through. Oh, guys, it worked. He yelled of probably to the rest of the class. Kaminari, Midnight suddenly said. What is going on there? She said, worried laced in her voice. Oh right. Well, some villains attacked us, G. We don't know how, but that isn't important right now. We need immediately backup. All Might is fighting this huge-ass bird, but it's not looking good. And Mr. Aizawa is badly hurt. We need you right now. Denki yelled. Near the end, he started to break up. Okay, we're on our way, Snipe said, and everyone was getting ready to leave. Hizashi had an empty look on his face, and he stood there frozen. His husband was badly hurt. He wanted to scream and cry out, and he wanted to continue his rant when he felt 2 pairs of soft hands on his shoulder. Hizashi, we have to move. We need to save Aizawa, she said. Those were the only words he needed to hear to unfreeze, and so the teachers made their way over to the USG facility. Please be okay, Zawa. I can't lose you, Hizashi thought as he ran out of the door. The pro heroes just arrived and saw some students help All Might. Shigaraki saw the other pro heroes and decided now was the time to book it. They could destroy All Might another time, and his precious 𝗵𝗲 was now somewhere in space because of the blonde pro hero, which he didn't like at all. Snipe started to shoot the low-life villains, and Shigaraki yelled at Kurogiri to open a warp gate, and just like that they were gone. Hizashi ran up to his husband. Some students were surrounding them, and next to him lay 13. She was also badly hurt, mostly on her back. He dropped down on his knees and put Aizawa's head in his lap. There was so much blood on him, and his arms looked messed up. Tears were falling from his eyes that he didn't even notice, and in just a second he was full on sobbing. Midnight crouched down next to Izashi, and her eyes were also glazed over. She put her hands on Izashi's shoulders in a reassuring manner. He looked up at her. "How am I going to tell this to Izuku?" he said with his voice laced with sadness. "I don't know." She said, her voice on breaking point. "The ambulance is almost here to take him to the hospital. How about you ride with him, and I'll go get Izuku from school and bring him over?" she said, trying her best to sound normal. He nodded and held his husband's hand. "Okay. He likes you the best. He'll come with you, and please don't say anything I won't need to tell him myself." He nodded. "He needs to hear this from his papa," he said, another tear falling from his eyes. Midnight stood up and left to go get Izuku. She had to call his school first, so that he could come to the office. She wouldn't want to disturb his class with her being a pro hero and all. The other kids looked at the other heroes as they loaded their teacher into the ambulance. "Is Mr. Aizawa going to be okay?" Kaminari said, looking down. "Your teacher is going to be just fine. The doctors will help him get better," 𝗵𝗃𝗲 said, putting a hand on his shoulder to lead him outside. The other teachers did the same thing and treated those that got injured. Midnight had her normal clothes on and waited in front of the front desk office. The lady that another teacher was getting Izuku from his class. "Why do you need him, if I may ask?" the lady said, trying to start a conversation. It's about one of his dads. That's all the information I can say now." "Sorry," she said, looking down. "That's all right. Oh, here he is." She pointed at the door and Izuku came in, and when he saw his Auntie Midnight, he ran up to her. She stood up and picked Izuku up and embraced him into a tight hug. "Too tight," he said, not getting any air in his lungs. "Oh, sorry." She put him down. "Izuku," she said, keeling down. "Yes, why are you here?" "School is not done yet." He smiled. "Your papa asked me to come and get you," she said, her eyes glazing over, but she didn't want the green-haired boy to notice something was wrong, so she blinked her eyes to get the tears to go away. "Why?" he asked again. "Well, we need to go somewhere, but he'll explain when he sees you," she said, getting up. "No, I want to know where he wants me to go," he said, stomping one foot on the ground and pouting. "Izuku." She began again, but he just gave her a more angry face. She sighed. "It's just a quick trip to the hospital. It's okay." His face went back to normal and gave a little nod. Okay, Izuku was not dumb. He knew that sick people got into the hospital, so his papa must be a little sick. "Dad told me that papa had to go to the hospital one time because he ate a bad fish." Izuku giggled as he started to walk out. Midnight smiled at the desk lady, and she gave a worried look at her. She knew Izuku's parents were pro heroes because she met them on his first day here. She hoped it wasn't too bad. The ride to the hospital was quiet because Midnight was afraid to slip up and tell him something that could set him off into another fit. They arrived and Nezu was waiting outside and led them inside. Izuku saw his papa sitting in a chair and ran up to him. "Papa, are you sick again?" He quickly wiped his tears away and hugged his son tight. "No, I'm not sick again, little listener." The rest of the teachers let them be and grabbed something to eat or drink from the vending machine. Hisashi put Izuku down on the chair next to him and crouched down in front of him. "Izuku, something happened at school today," he said, grabbing his little hands. "Was there another villain in the school?" he asked, tilting his head a little. "Kind of." Izuku looked around. You could see he was getting restless. First of, some teachers were there. Second of all, they didn't look as happy as they normally do. And lastly, where was his dad? "Where is Daddy?" Izuku asked, looking around. "Daddy got into a fight with a villain, and he got a little hurt." Once those words left his mouth, Izuku's eyes started to water, his lip quivering. "He promised me that he wouldn't get hurt." "You're lying," he yelled. Hisashi grabbed Izuku's hands a little tighter, but didn't hurt him. "I'm sorry, Izuku, but it's true," he said, biting his lip, while there were silent tears streaming down his face. "I want to see Daddy." He began to cry while throwing his arms around his papa's neck. "We have to wait a little while till the doctor comes out and tells us we can see him," he said, picking Izuku up in the process and holding his back, while the young boy wrapped his little legs around his papa so that he wouldn't fall down. Everyone was waiting anxiously in the waiting room. Izuku had fallen asleep in his papa's arms. His little face was tear-stained and had his thumb in his mouth, a bad habit he only did when he was scared. It has been at least 5 hours since they brought Aizawa in. The doctors were probably performing surgery on him from his injuries. Then a doctor came out of the door, and everyone looked in her direction. "Shota Aizawa?" she asked around the room. Everyone stood up, including Hisashi. He moved his arms up so that he had a better grip onto his son, who was still asleep. The doctor came closer with a clipboard. "How is he doing?" Midnight asked her. "Well, we had to put pins in both his arms so that it can heal properly." She read a little further. "His skull also had some trauma, so we had to bandage his whole head up." The doctor said some other important things about Aizawa's injuries, but the most important thing Hisashi got out of it were these specific words. "He's gonna pull through just fine," the doctor said with a little smile on her face. "Can we see him?" Hisashi asked. She nodded. "Yes, but only close family." "You're his husband, right?" she asked. "Yes, and our son. Can he come too?" Hisashi asked, holding Izuku tighter. "Yes, but that's all I can allow for now," she stated, and waited for him to follow. He looked at the other heroes with a sad look on his face. Midnight put her hand on his shoulder and gave a reassuring smile. "It's okay, we'll visit some other time," she said. He nodded and started to follow the doctor that saved his husband's life. While they were walking through the hallways, Izuku had woken up and rubs his eye with his little fist. He looked around and saw these white walls again. He got some flashbacks from the day that his parents laid here. He wrapped his arms around Hisashi's neck and buried his face in the nape of his papa's neck. They arrived at the room, and the female doctor let them in. "I have to warn you. It may look scary, but it's necessary." She pulled the curtain aside and Hisashi gasped a little. There was his husband laying motionless. He couldn't see his handsome face anymore because of the bandages, and both of his arms were in a plaster. Izuku looked, "Daddy," but got no answer, so he started to wiggle, indicating he wanted to get out of his papa's grasp. Hisashi put him carefully down and Izuku walked over to the bed. He saw a chair and pushed it a little closer to the bed and sat on it with his knees so he had a better view. Once he saw better, his eyes glazed over and silent tears fell out. He carefully touched his dad's face, but pulled back immediately, afraid to hurt him more. He put his forehead on the mattress and whispered, "You promised me you wouldn't get hurt." Hisashi heard what he said, and it felt like someone stabbed him in the heart with tiny needles, so he sat down on the hospital bed, cautious, so he didn't hurt Aizawa unnecessarily. Izuku looked back up and walked over to his papa and put his arms up, signaling to be picked up. Hisashi leaned down and picked him up and put him on his lap. They sat there all night looking at the person they both loved more in the entire world, waiting to wake up. Over the past 5 days, Izuku would visit his dad all day. His school had given him a leave of absence for family matters, so that he could spend more time with Aizawa. Hisashi still had to teach some classes, but the other teachers took some of his classes over, so he wasn't overloaded with work. There was always someone by Izuku's side, was it his papa or someone from the UA teachers. Izuku was drawing at the moment. He made these drawings daily to brighten up the room at least. He was telling his dad what he had drawn, 1. Because he was still not awake, and 2nd, he had these stupid bandages that made him look like a mummy, as Izuku described it. He was having a hard time with the situation. He didn't want to lose another parent, still some lingering trauma from when his parents died. He was starting to get his nightmares again, the fire mixed with the first time he saw his dad like this. He was alone in the room, except for Aizawa, because Nezu was watching over him, because his papa had to go home to get some clothes for when his husband woke up. Izuku was in the middle of telling the story behind his newest drawing when there was a knock on the door. He stopped talking and got up and hid behind his dad's hospital bed and said a small but audible yes. The door opened and a teenager with bright spiky red hair walked in. Izuku walked from behind the bed. He had to protect his dad. He wasn't going to let him get hurt again. "Who are you?" He pointed his finger at the teen. "Oh, hello little dude. I'm Kirishima, a student from Mr. Aizawa's class," he said with a kind smile on his face. That smile made Izuku smile. "Okay, I believe you." He crawled back onto his dad's bed and sat down crisscross, looking at Kirishima. He walked closer, looking at his teacher with sadness in his eyes, and back at the green-haired kid that was still looking at him. He bent forward. "And who are you, little dude?" he asked. Izuku got shy all of a sudden and looked down and played with the blanket that covered his dad. "Izuku Aizawa Hisashi," he said. Kirishima looked shocked. Since when did their teachers have a son? His thoughts were interrupted by Izuku. "Were you there when my dad got hurt?" he asked. Kirishima nodded. "Our whole class was there. Your dad was so brave that he saved us all, but getting hurt nonetheless." He looked down and back up when he felt 2 pairs of little hands on his arm. "Don't be sad. Papa says that Daddy is going to make it through all of this." I was sad too at first. "It hurts to see him like this." Kirishima smiled at Izuku's optimism. "Are you the only one here?" Izuku asked, letting go off the red-haired boy. Kirishima rubbed his neck. "Yeah. We aren't allowed to come here due overcrowding, Mr. Aizawa. But my mom is a nurse here, and I came here to get lunch with her." He smiled. Izuku smiled. "You sound like a good son." Kirishima put his fist out to give the boy a fist bump. "You too, keeping your dad company." When they bumped their fists together, they heard a groan coming from the side. Aizawa was waking up. "Dad," Izuku said, holding his dad's leg. What happened?" "He had some trouble speaking. Well, he did just wake up." "I'll go get a doctor," Kirishima said, already running out. Izuku started crying again, but now tears of happiness. "You're awake," he said. Aizawa opened his eyes, but saw nothing but darkness, and he couldn't move his arms. Izuku noticed this and tried to calm him down. "Daddy, it's okay, I am here, please stay calm." He tried to sound reassuring, but he just copied the words his papa told him a few days ago when he had a mind panic attack. Aizawa listened to his son's words and took deep, calming breath. And the door opened and the same doctor that operated on him came inside with a nurse and Kirishima. The doctor asked some questions regarding his memory. It was all coming back now. The villains, the attacks, that huge bird. He carefully shook his head to clear it all up and answered everything correctly. The nurse that looked like Kirishima's mom cut the bandages around his eyes so he could see again. The first thing he saw was Izuku. He looked tired and a little pale. "Daddy, can I give you a hug?" he asked. Aizawa smiled that was not visible due to the bandages. "Come here, problem child." And without a second going by, Izuku was carefully hugging his dad. Izuku started to cry again. "You promise Edme T to not get who hurt," he said between sobs. Kirishima was watching the situation play out. And he was also crying himself. The nurse put an arm around him, and he hugged her. "I'm sorry I made you a promise that I couldn't keep, Izu." The door swung open and Hisashi walked in with the clothes. He looked up and dropped them on the ground, and ran to the bed. His husband was finally awake. "Shuata-ah," he yelled, and also hugged him. He looked back up and hit his leg. "Don't you dare to ever fight alone again," he said with every slap. Izuku giggled a bit, wiping his tears away in the process. "Awa," was all Aizawa could say. "Oh, don't be so dramatic, I didn't hit that hard," Hisashi said. After giving his teacher the "get better soon" speech, he left the room to get said lunch with his mom. He hoped he was going to see the little green-haired dude again sometime soon. Aizawa could finally leave the hospital after 3 more agonizing days. When they got home, he noticed Izuku was being careful around him. For instance, Izuku hadn't hugged him ever since they got home. For someone that didn't know the situation would say, "You just got home. Don't be dramatic." But normally Izuku would hug his dad's leg constantly when he was down. Now he was sitting at the table coloring in his book that Hisashi got him whilst he was in the hospital. So Aizawa had to interfere. "Hey bud, what you doing?" Izuku looked up at his dad and showed him by pushing his book closer to Aizawa. He sat down next to Izuku, but he moved a little to the side. Aizawa looked at him and smiled, which he couldn't see due to the bandages. "Izu, are you afraid of me?" he asked. Izuku shook his head. "No, I'm not scared of you. I just don't want to hurt you. You have to heal," Papa said. He tried to explain. "Okay, I understand. But I bet a hug from you would make me feel a lot better right now," he said, opening his arms wide. Izuku hesitated, but hugged his dad carefully, trying not to hurt him. Aizawa understood it, so he was glad his son wanted to hug him at least. The days passed in the household, everyone being careful around Aizawa, but not babying him. Izuku went back to school after the second day. His dad was home and Hisashi too, so Aizawa was home alone during these times. He didn't mind that. He could sleep all he wanted without being disturbed. And then the day came. Saturday, the day of the school's sport festival. They arrived and stood at the door where President Mike was going to give commentary. He held Izuku on his hip, who was looking around trying to everything that was going on, even if they were standing in a bland hallway. "I'm going to wish my students good luck before they begin. After that I'll come back," Aizawa explained. Hisashi gave him a kiss on his bandaged cheek and said okay and opened the door to the room where he'll be giving commentary in a few minutes. Aizawa opened the door where his students were waiting before the sports festival. "Mr. Aizawa," Mina exclaimed. "Are you okay? We heard you went home a few days ago. You weren't in the hospital for a long time. Are you sure you can be out like this? You look like a mummy." There were way too many questions for him. He put his casted arm up to silence them. "Don't worry about me, problem children. I just came here to wish you all the best of luck. Don't let the events of last week discourage you, all right?" he said. Everyone smiled and nodded. Every one of them is going to try hard to come first to not disappoint their teacher. He fought really hard back at the 𝐕 for them, so the least they could do was making him proud. Even though Aizawa thought that wasn't necessary, because he thought his students were already good and didn't need to make him proud. But he wasn't going to say that now was he. Izuku wasn't paying much attention, so he didn't hear his dad enter the room again. He was looking outside of the window, the big field where the students were going to compete against each other, and here and there at the TV screen that gave him a better and more close look. "This is so cool, Papa," he yelled, face and hands pressed against the window. "I know, right?" his papa yelled back. Aizawa sat down next to his husband on a chair. Hisashi looked at the time and the sport festival had begun. Aizawa picked Izuku up from the long-looking table in front of them and put him on his lap. Izuku was giving of this energy that indicated he was happy to be there. "Welcome, everyone, to U.S. annual sports festival." President Mike's loud voice beamed through the speakers that are scattered around the area. The public went wild and started to yell yeahs and woohoos. He continued his speech, and then let the word over to Midnight, who is standing on the podium downstairs. Dad, can I go down to Auntie Midnight? He asked his dad while turning around. No, not now. Maybe later we can go down to get a better view. He said he didn't want to make Izuku mad with just the no word. Okay, Izuku said with a smile and turned back around and sat on his knees now. Midnight called Bakugo to the front to say some inspiring words. Izuku leaned his hands on the table and leaned in closer. His dad held his waist with his casted arms so he wouldn't slip forward and hit his head. He looked at the blonde boy, wanting to hear everything he said. Bakugo leaned forward and spoke into the microphone. I'm gonna win this stupid festival, he said with not much emotion in his voice, and walked back down. The other students started booing at him. Aizawa rolled his eyes at his students' behavior, while Izuku slumped back down onto his dad's knees. He looks like a big meanie, Izuku said while crossing his arms. That's because he is one, Aizawa deadpanned. Midnight finished her speech, and now it could start for real. The preliminary competition is an obstacle race. The students got all ready, and when Present Mike shouted, "Start!" everyone started running. The green-haired boy started to lean in again and watched with full ambition, not missing a single thing. Aizawa's class was doing pretty well. His top students, Todoroki and Bakugo, are in first place for the time being. And Todoroki passed the first obstacle, Present Mike shouted, and Bakugo following suit. Todoroki uses his ice to get over the fall zone and passes without breaking a sweat. Hisashi was way too exited for this, his husband thought. Present Mike continued to give commentary throughout the first round. Todoroki finished first, meaning he won the first trial. Midnight went back onto the stage and declared Todoroki to be the winner. Also, 42 students passed the obstacle race, so they'll be advancing to the next round. She yelled with her hand into the air while smiling. She said there will be a short break, and then she'll explain the next round. Dad, I have to go to the bathroom, he said while jumping of his dad's lap and crossing his legs, indicating that he indeed had to go. All right, I'll come with you, he said standing up. Hisashi nodded and asked to bring some drinks up while they went downstairs. Aizawa was waiting outside of the common bathroom. He looked down to his arms and rubs it against his upper torso. Man, these stupid casts are starting to itch, he stated with an annoyed voice. That means they're healing. He heard a voice next to him. He looked at the source and saw his smiling student, Kirishima. Aizawa greeted. My mom told me, he explained further, even though his teacher didn't ask. The bathroom door opened and Izuku walked out with wet hands. He looked at his dad. The paper towels are finished, he said with a pout. Aizawa wanted to answer Izuku, but Kirishima interrupted them. Hey little dude. Wait here, I have a towel in the locker room, without waiting on an answer. A minute later, Kirishima ran back up to them with a white towel. Here you go little dude, Ha said, while giving Izuku the towel. Thank you Mr. Izuku said, while drying his hands. You can call me Kirishima little dude. Izuku became shy and hid behind his dad's legs. Okay, Kiri. You can call me Izuku. The green-haired boy thought it was weird he kept saying little dude. Kirishima smiled at the nickname Izuku gave him. Okay, then I'll call you Izu, he smiled, which gave the reaction of Izuku burying his face deeper in the fabric of his dad's legs. You didn't have to do that, Kirishima. He could have wiped his hands on his clothes. It's just water, Aizawa said. He wanted to ruffle Izuku's hair, but couldn't due to that damn cast. Oh sorry teach, he said nervously with his hand to his neck. Papa says it's dirty to do that, Izuku said. Kirishima looked confused. If Aizawa is his dad, that means that this Papa is his teacher's husband. Who could that be? Not with water, Zuku, Aizawa said. Izuku made a no face and stepped from behind his dad, but held his dad's pants between his little fists. Well, we have to go get drinks for Hisashi, he said. Kirishima looked back at his teacher, Present Mike. Maybe they're together, but I'm not gonna pry, Kirishima thought. Okay, have fun watching the rest of the festival, Izu and Mr. Aizawa, Kirishima said, turning around and walking back to the locker room, saying nothing about the encounter he just had with his teacher and son. By the way, his teacher wouldn't appreciate him saying these things anyways. He hasn't brought Izu and Present Mike up in class for a reason, he thought. Bye, Kiri. Izuku waved at his new friend and walked with his dad over to a vending machine for drinks. Hisashi was looking down to the field where some students were already walking around ready for the next event. His eyes stopped on Kaminari and Mainta. They came outside with smirks on their faces. What are these two up to? His question was answered when the girls of Wanna came outside too, but with cheerlead outfits. Hisashi face-palmed but smiled again when Momo hit Mainta on the head. The door opened again and his son ran in and plopped down on his lap. Now carrying 2 drinks, Izuku will drink with one of his dads because he can't drink a whole bottle on his own. Hisashi said his thanks and opened both the bottles because he was the only one that could do it right now. Izuku made grabby hands and Hisashi gave him the bottle and Izuku held it with both his hands. It was too cute, both parents thought. Their little moment was interrupted when Midnight announced that the second event was going to begin. The second event is called Cavalry Battle. Since our lovely Todoroki won the first round, he'll be worth 10 million points, she exclaimed. Todoroki cringed at the nickname the female hero gave him. You'll be dividing yourselves into groups of 4. But you only get 15 minutes. She finished, and everyone went to find a partner. Not many people wanted to go with Todoroki, because everyone would come after him for his points. He looked so he stood there alone in the middle of the field. Why won't anyone team up with the red and white hair-colored boy Papa? Izuku asked with a frown on his face. Hisashi explained it was because he had so much points and nobody wanted to lose. Izuku put on his determined face. If no one is going to join him, I will. Izuku said he knew he was probably not allowed, but he could try anyway. No. And 3 other students have to team up or else they won't have team anyways, Aizawa reasoned with his son. And not a minute later, 2 students stood in front of Todoroki. Hey Todoroki-kun, we'll join your team. Uraraka said, putting her fists up in the air and taking the person beside her, his fist 2 up. Shinso put not much emotion on his face. He hated working with others. Okay, I'll try not to lose, Todoroki said, and Shinso and Uraraka nodded. But we'll need another member for our team, Shinso said. Todoroki looked around and smirked. I have an idea. You want me to join your team? Tokoyami asked. Yes, was the only thing Todoroki said. Your dark shadow would be great to defend us, Shinso said, hoping the bird would just say yes already. True. With your ice, we could also keep the others far away from us. So okay, I'll join your team. It was an exciting battle. Points got stolen, while the teams wouldn't notice, but the end was the most excited because Bakugo's explosion collided with Todoroki's ice. So there was a dust cloud swirling around the students, so the teachers couldn't see who had won. When the cloud had disappeared, Bakugo had his hand in the air with Todoroki's 10 million points. He smirked at the other team, happy with his victory. The mean boy won, Izuku said, but looked closer. Kiri is also in this team, so he also wins, right? Izuku asked. Yes, Team Bakugo won this round, Aizawa said, while Hisashi announced it to the rest of the stadium. Another break was there to prepare them for the last event. Someone knocked on the door and Midnight strolled in and smiled when she saw her nephew. Is he coped up in here all day? She asked. Yeah, he's keeping me company, Hisashi said while hugging his son. Aizawa cleared his throat and looked at Hisashi. And Aizawa too, obviously. He let out a little laugh. Well, then I will be taking him downstairs so he gets some fresh air and can watch the last event up close, she said, picking Izuku up and putting him on her hip. Shouldn't you ask us first? Aizawa said, a little irritated. He didn't like people just running off with his son, even though it was a close friend of theirs. The kid needs to go outside. It's not good to keep a 4-year-old inside all day, she said, ready to walk outside. Please, Dad, Papa. I will stay close to Auntie 𝗵𝗲. Hisashi looked at Aizawa. It didn't matter to him. He trusted Midnight with all his heart. Aizawa sighed. Fine. But don't lose him out of your sight, okay? Aizawa said sternly. He was quite overprotective when it came to Izuku. Yeah, I'll keep him on a short leash, she said while walking out. Izuku waved goodbye to his dads. All Might was also downstairs and saw Midnight with young Midoriya. Hello, young Midoriya, he said. Hey, Uncle Might, he said with a little wave. Are you here to watch the last game? Izuku nodded. Yep. Midnight handed him to the blonde teacher. Can you keep an eye on him? I need to announce the last event, she said while walking away. Izuku looked him up and down. Why are you looking like this sometimes? He asked. Yagi chuckled. This was going to be a long story. Midnight announced what the last event was going to be. Aizawa squinted his eyes. Where is Izuku? He asked his husband. I think she gave him to Yagi. He pointed at the TV screen that portrayed the image of All Might holding Izuku while talking. They both let out a sigh when they saw their son was safe. So I heard your quirk has manifested. Young Midoriya. Izuku looked confused. He understood what Yagi asked of him. Something about his quirk. What does mani faded mean? He asked, pronouncing the word not quite right. Manifested. Yagi asked, to which Izuku nodded. Well, it means that something has been expressed in this case. I mean it with your quirk. Yagi tried to explain. He didn't know how else to do it. He never had to explain a word to a literal child. He just knew what it meant, so he used it. Izuku didn't understand it completely, but nodded anyways. He'll ask his papa about it later. He's an English teacher, so he should know it. Some of the battles have passed. Kirishima went against a kid that could go into all metal, a little like Kirishima, only that he was made out of stone. Izuku sat in Yagi's neck. He was talking to Midnight, so didn't spend too much attention on the boy in his neck. Izuku saw Kirishima fighting the other boy. They punched each other real hard at the same time, and both passed out. After that, he heard his papa's voice through the speakers. Wow, that looked like it hurt a lot. Is it over? The hard heads looked to be his papa exclaimed over the speakers. Izuku sucked in a breath, and a few minutes later medics took away their unconscious bodies to the infirmary. Izuku saw him open his eyes and say something to the other boy that had also woken up. They both seemed to laugh it off. Izuku wanted to congratulate his friend, so he concentrated and teleported into the infirmary. He teleported in front of the door, just as it closed, meaning the medics had already checked them out and left. Izuku ran up to Kirishima's bed and sat on it, his knee tucked under his legs. "Kiri, are you okay?" Izuku asked, and Kirishima opened his eyes. "Hey Izu." He sat up. "I'm all better. Recovery girl made me better with her wonder kiss." He mimicked the kissing sound, which made Izuku laugh and Kirishima. "You were amazing just now," Izuku said, making his hands into little fists and moving them both up and down. "Thanks Izu, but I didn't win," he said with a little smile. "We probably need to do a rematch." A new voice cut in. "Tetsu. How's your head?" Kirishima asked. "Good. You threw a good punch at me," he said. "I could say the same for you," Kirishima said. "So who's the kid?" Tetsu asked. "Just a good friend of mine," Kirishima said, which made Izuku smile. "How did you get in here anyway? There's security everywhere," he asked the green-haired one. "Oh, I just teleported in here," Izuku said like it was nothing. "You can teleport?" Kirishima said. "Dude, that's such an amazing quirk," Kirishima said. "Thank you. I want to become a hero just like Dad," he said. "You will make an amazing hero," Kirishima said, petting the boy's hair. "Wait. Who's your dad?" Tetsu asked. Eraserhead. Kirishima deadpanned. "Cool," Tetsu said. Yagi wanted to ask his nephew if he wanted something to eat, because he has been oddly quiet for some time. But when he looked up behind him, Izuku was gone. His mouth fell open and looked frankly around. "Did you take Midoriya?" He looked at Midnight. "No. He was on your shoulders just a few minutes ago." She panicked. Did someone take him while they weren't looking? Just then Aizawa came up to them. "Hey, I came to get Izu. It's time for his nap, so I'm gonna take him home." He looked at the weirdly pale colleagues. "Where is he?" he asked sternly. "How you see Aizawa? He was just here, but now he is like... not here anymore." Yagi tried to keep the situation light. Aizawa wanted to murder both heroes. Midnight promised to keep an eye on him. Goddammit. He was gonna keep it cool, no need to cause a scene. Did he use his teleportation quirk? He asked. He wanted to pinch the bridge of his nose, but he couldn't. Do his casts. Quirk? I didn't know he had a quirk, Midnight said. Yes. Ugh, he thought about the previous match suddenly, of course. Kirishima, I'm gonna look in the infirmary, he said monotone and walking off. He will never trust these people again, not even with a flour bag. We'll come too. They both yelled and followed. Aizawa opened the door and saw Izuku curled up on Kirishima's chest. He combed his fingers through the green one's hair while talking to Tetsu. Oh hey Mr. Aizawa. Hope you don't mind Izu falling asleep here. He came here to check on me after the battle. He explained without breaking a sweat, like it was the most natural situation. No, I don't. Thank you Kirishima to take care of him. He went over to the bed. I will be taking him home. He needs to nap in his bed now, Aizawa explained and wanted to take Izuku but couldn't. Due to his freaking arms. I'll help you, Kirishima said, sitting up and adjusting Izuku a bit better, and stood up. I'll carry him to your car, Aizawa nodded, and they both walked out. Midnight and All Might stood there frozen, glad he was okay, but confused. He let his student carry his son. Kirishima put him in the car seat and made sure he was well secured and opened the passenger door for Aizawa. He looked who was behind the wheel, and his thoughts were confirmed. It was his English teacher, Present Mike. So he and Mr. Aizawa were together, he thought. Present Mike, aren't you presenting the festival? He asked the loud blonde teacher. Yay. But it's a break for now, so I'll bring them home quick and come back myself. Kirishima nodded. Oh okay, well get home safe, bye. They said their goodbyes and the car drove off. He smiled at the car that was becoming smaller while driving further away and out of sight. Oi. Shitty hair. What ya doing out here? You have a fucking rematch with Silver Boy out there. His friend Bakugo yelled for Kirishima. It was his friend, only Bakugo didn't know that yet. Oh yay, I'm coming. He laughed and ran up to Bakugo. Izuku has been living with Aizawa and Hisashi for about a year now. On his 5th birthday, some of the pro heroes showed up. Even Kirishima came by and brought him a birthday present. It was the best day of his life. Izuku was currently getting ready for school. He smiled at himself in the mirror and ran downstairs and jumped off the last 3 stairs. His papa almost had a heart attack when he did it for the first time. He went to sit down in his chair when someone gave him a kiss on his head. He looked up and smiled up at his papa. Good morning, Papa, he said with a giant smile on his face. He looked over at his dad, but he was on a phone call, and he didn't look happy. Better wait until he is done, Izuku thought. Aizawa's morning did not start great. Well, I did. But it went downhill after he drank his delicious coffee. when he got a phone call from Izuku's school. They explained that the school will be closed for a week because apparently All Might had chased down a villain last night. I thought it was a good idea to destroy half of Izuku's school in the process. He thanked the lady on the phone for the information and looked at the clock. He could not get a babysitter in the short amount of time they had left before he needed to go and teach. And he didn't trust anyone with his son after the events of last year's sports festival. So that's why he was on the phone with Nezu, to ask if Izuku could come to UA for today until they found someone to babysit Izuku. Of course, my favorite nephew can visit us today. And if you don't find anyone, he is always welcome here. Nezu spoke in a happy tone. Okay, thank you. Nezu, Aizawa said, a little unsure, and ended the phone call. Izu, go change in your normal clothes. School's cancelled, he said while looking at the confusion lacing his son and husband's faces. That's how Izuku found himself looking around in the hallways of the most amazing school to ever exist. To put it in Izuku's words, he wanted to run off to see more, but gentle arms picked him up, and he faced his papa's nervous look. Don't run off like that, little listener. You could get lost, Hisashi said, tightening his grip on Izuku. Okay, papa, he pouted. Hisashi looked at Aizawa and handed him over to him. It's best if you take him to your class. You have won all morning so he doesn't have to move or see many people. Hisashi said he knew how people shy their son was. Besides, Kirishima was in this class, and they were practically best friends even if they had a huge age difference. But Izuku seemed to like Kirishima, so who cares? Aizawa had to make a stop in the teacher's lounge to get the tests he had planned for the students today. It shouldn't take that long. Grab them and walk back out. Well, that would have been an easy plan, but no. All the other teachers had to talk to Izuku and Shota himself. Yagi strolled over to where Shota and Izuku were. Hey, little man. What are you doing here? I thought you had school. It is the week, right? He asked. It was too early for so many questions for Shota's opinion. He let go off Izuku's hand to cross his arms. Well, he would have been in school right now if you weren't so reckless last night and destroyed half the neighborhood where Izuku's school is coincidental, Shota said in his monotone voice. Izuku grew bored of the big people conversation, so he wandered off to where his Auntie Nem was and started to tell about his morning. She was all ears, of course. The blonde's eyes widened and then started to look around, avoiding eye contact with the other man, and rubbed his neck. Oh, well, I'm sorry, but it was a wild chase, and I captured the perpetrator. So no harm, no foul, right? He chuckled at the end. Shota looked even more annoyed. You destroyed his school. How can there be no foul in this situation? Yagi's lips formed a thin line and didn't answer immediately. Yeah, thought so, Shota said, and wanted to grab Izuku's hand, but didn't find it, so he looked behind him and saw him have a vivid conversation with Mimiri. I'll be leaving now. Wasted enough time here already, the dark-haired male mumbled and walked towards his son. Yagi gave a little smile and waved at Aizawa. Oh, yay, I also have duties to do as a teacher. See you at lunch, eraser. Shota ignored him, of course. Aizawa looked at the clock. 15 minutes. That's the time he lost here. Yeah, all his students were already in the classroom for sure. He reached the two and picked Izuku up. We have to leave for class now. Say bye to new Izuku. Shota said. Bye, Auntie Nem. See you later. The green-haired boy said with a tiny wave. Bye, my favorite nephew, she said with a big smile, which made Izuku giggle. When he walked in the classroom, he forgot he was carrying Izuku. So the class looked at him in shock, except for Kirishima. Mr. Aizawa, I don't think you know you have a child in your arms, Kaminari said. Aizawa looked at Izuku, who was smiling up at him and wanted to mess with his students. This will be the training dummy for today class, he said with the most straight face ever. Izuku knew his dad liked to mess with everyone once in a while, but not everyone noticed because Aizawa was not known to make these kind of jokes, so Izuku rolled his eyes. Class 1 were looking at each other with pure shock and maybe a little fear. How were they supposed to fight a child? But Kirishima broke the uncomfortable silence with 2 words. Hey, Izu, he yelled while he waved at the kid. Some of the faces his classmates made were priceless. Aizawa put Izuku down on the ground, and he ran up to Kirishima. Kiri, he yelled and jumped on his lap and hugged him. Now, how do you know this child? Ida yelled with his chopping arms. Aizawa sighed and picked Izuku up when he came back running at him after the cuddle session with the redhead. Class, this is my son, Izuku. Izuku, this is the class I daily teach. Izuku whispered something in his ear, and Aizawa chuckled and nodded. Yes, Izuku just nodded and looked at the class who were looking at him. So he hid his face in his dad's scarf. That got him a few ahwas from some of the children. Mina put her hand up, and Aizawa nodded in her direction. Why is he here today? Aizawa looked outside the window and back at the class. Because All Might destroyed his school last night. That earned him a few O's and OKs. But don't let Izuku be a distraction for you all. You are still here to learn, Aizawa said, while grabbing an extra chair for his son to sit on. Class passed by fairly quickly after the test. They got a 10-minute break, and the next thing they were going to do was training outside, to link the theory they just got and put it out in the field. Aizawa looked at his empty mug and went to get some coffee and told the class, but was more looking at Kirishima to watch Izuku until he got back. The class looked at Izuku, who was too busy scratching his coloring pencils over his paper. He looked up and saw the class looking at him and smiled at them. Mina walked up to the front on crouch down in front of Izuku and stuck her hand out high. My name is Mina Ashido. She gave him a bright smile, which he returned. Izuku Aizawa Hazashi. Papa says I always have to introduce my full name. It's the polite way to do so. He smiled again and shook her bigger hand. She screeched in happiness and picked Izuku up from his chair and walked to the middle of the class, and everyone surrounded them. She put him in her lap while she sat on the desk. You have quite the vocabulary for a 4-year-old, Minato said, crossing his arms while walking up to them. I'm 5, you midget, Izuku deadpanned while narrowing his eyes. They stared at each other for a few more seconds, everyone trying to hold in their laughs. Well, your words can't hurt me because you're just a toddler, Minato said, giving a smug look at Izuku. The rest of the class were ready to throw hands with him when Izuku jumped down from Mina's lap and stood in front of Minato. Well, you're just a stupid meanie poopie baby, Izuku said back, crossing his arms and looking proud of himself. Bakugo smirked from his stance against one of the desks. I like this kid. Everyone let out a laugh from the look on Minta's face. Ooh, burned by an ankle biter, Shiro said with his fist in front of his mouth. Izuku then ran over to his desk and ran back to the rest of the class. He stood in front of Kirishima with grabby hands, and he picked him up. What you got there, Izu? He asked, and Izuku turned around and showed him a normal-looking notebook, but it looked big in Izuku's small hands. This is my notebook where I analyze other people's quirk. He smiled and grabbed a pencil and opened his book. Look, I have a page with your quirk and some ideas you can maybe use in the future. He was so excited he could finally show it to him. Kirishima took the notebook and looked at the analysis. Wow, Izu, I didn't know you were that observant, he said with excitement. Some other students asked if he could do the same for them, but Aizawa walked back inside. Put on your gym clothes and meet me outside in 7 minutes, he said, and looked at Izuku. Come, Izuku, you're gonna watch. Izuku nodded and ran over to his dad, taking the notebook with him. Izuku sat on the bench near the door. The first two to walk out were Todoroki and Shinso. Izuku smiled at them, and they walked over to him. So you're Aizawa's secret child, huh? Todoroki said, and Shinso elbowed him. Sorry about him. He doesn't know how to communicate with certain people. Still doesn't till this day, Shinso sighed. That made Izuku laugh. You two are funny. That brought a little smile on Todoroki's face. My name is Shoto Todoroki, he introduced himself. Izuku smiled. Okie dokie, Todoroki. He giggled and continued. I'm Izuku Aizawa Hazashi, he said. Todoroki's eyes widened. And present Mike's secret child. Wow. He looked at Shinso. What else is he hiding from us, he questioned. I don't know, maybe that he is a wizard, Shinso teased, his voice laced with sarcasm. You're being sarcastic, Todoroki deadpanned. Go to the field, the rest of the class will be here soon, he ordered Shinso. Okie dokie, Todoroki. Shinso saluted him and walked away laughing. Todoroki still didn't understand why he was laughing, but it gave him a smile of his own. He looked back at Izuku and smiled. You're a funny kid, he said. Not the first time I hear that, Izuku said, looking down at his notebook and back at Todoroki, and smiled. Training was done and Izuku had a bunch of new notes on the class's quirks. The bell announced it was lunchtime and Kirishima asked if Izuku could eat lunch with them. It took a while, but Aizawa agreed to let Izuku have lunch with the class. Everyone wanted to talk to the green-haired boy, so a lot of class sat at the same table chatting away with Izuku. When an unpleasant voice announced himself, Well, if it isn't Class 1, Monoma said he wanted to continue and ask, or rather demand, what a preschooler was doing here at UA, when Todoroki, who was sitting closest to Monoma, said, It is. Monoma looked confused at the bi-colored boy. It is Class 1, Todoroki continued. The blonde rolled his eyes. It's an expression, dumbass. He said, This idiot is embarrassing me, he thought. Todoroki looked around confused and back at Monoma. It's not an expression, this is Class 1, he said while he scrunched his eyebrows together. The rest of the class started laughing, and he got angry. It doesn't matter. Why is there a toddler sitting at your table? Izuku looked at the bully and stood on his chair, Kirishima holding his shirt so he wouldn't fall. I'm not a toddler, dumbass. Izuku was proud again of the insult. He just made his dad would whoop his ass if he knew he used that kind of language. Great, you just taught him how to swear. Idiot Bakugo tusked at Monoma. Yeah, idiot Izuku, repeated Bakugo. Mina gave him a "Are you serious" look, to which he just rolled his eyes. Before Monoma could elaborate, a huge hand smacked him on the back of his neck, and he passed out. Sorry guys. I really should put a leash on him, Kendo apologized and dragged him away. Izuku sat back down and looked up at Kirishima with a pout. What a dumbass idiot, he said. Kirishima looked at the rest of the table. Great, we taught him how to swear. Mr. Aizawa is gonna kill us. And everyone said at the same time, shit, which Izuku also repeated. Okay Izuku, you can absolutely not swear in front of your dads, Kirishima said, while crouched down and holding Izuku's shoulders. Okay, but why? He questioned, while tilting his head a bit to the side. Kirishima thought for a second. Because. Then your dad will never allow you to see me. And the class again. Yeah, Kirishima said. Yeah, never again. Kaminari leaned in over the redhead's shoulder, looking very serious. Okay, I won't say a thing, Izuku's face laced with determination. The rest of the day went by very quickly. Somewhere else, a dark room filled with one bright computer screen. You could make out a silhouette of a man. Get the plan started. Yes, sir. The next day went the same. Izuku sat on his chair in his dad's classroom. He was working on a new drawing. The sound of Aizawa's voice filtered out to deepen thoughts to register what was being said. After a while, the students were making a test they had to study for the previous day, so Izuku stood up and walked over to his dad. Can I go to the bathroom? He asked in a whisper kind of tone, looking up at his dad. His dad looked at him and back at the class. You know the way? I can't leave these menaces alone here. Aizawa responded in the same hushed tone. I can go alone, I know the way. Izuku said, already turning around. Okay, come back as soon as you're done. Can't have you get lost, Izu? He said, looking back at some papers at his desk. Izuku walked through the halls of UA, passing no one since classes were still in progress for the older students. He arrived at the restroom. After a few minutes, he washed his hands and dried them on some paper wipes that were provided in the restroom. He opened the door, but didn't look up when he started to walk, so he bumped into someone and landed on his butt. Oh. He looked up and saw a hand reaching out. Izuku. I'm so sorry, said a familiar voice. He took the hand and was standing on his feet now. Are you okay? I didn't see you there, said the high-pitched voice. Yeah. Hey, you're from my dad's class. The gravity girl, he stated. Oh. Yes. Yes, I am from your dad's class, she said, a little too confident. Aren't you supposed to be making his test? He asked while crossing his little arms. Oh. Yes, but I finished already. Yeah, because I'm too smart for his tests, she said, and looked around. Seeing no one, she continued. Your dad asked me to take you outside, because my class is having training outside, Uraraka said, holding out her hand for him to take. Izuku looked at the hand and back at the girl in front of him. You're from my dad's class, so I guess I can trust you. He shrugged and took her hand. She pulled the green-haired boy through the hallways and through a door that led outside. He let go of her hand and stepped a little forward and looked around. Hey, no one is here? Why did you take me here? He turned around to confront Uraraka, but was met with something sharp poking in his arm. He looked at it, and it looked like a syringe. The girl smiled sinister at him. Oopsie, and she started to melt in front of him. His vision started to go in and out of focus. Damn it, my time is up. Not enough blood. She said, disappointed. Oh well. The plan succeeded anyway. And that's when Izuku started to fall forward. The girl Izuku had no idea who she was now that she melted into someone else caught him anyway despite her evil plan. She didn't want him hurt apparently. Good night, Izuku, she smiled at him, and that's the last thing he saw before everything went black. Aizawa looked back up at the clock that hung above the classroom door, and his eyes widened when he saw half an hour had passed and Izuku still wasn't back. He looked over at the class and saw that only Kaminari and Shinso were still working on their tests. He locked eyes with Kirishima, and he gave his teacher a question look. Aizawa mentioned with his head that he needed to come to his desk. As to not disturb the two remaining students, he whispered, Can you go look in the closet's restroom to see if Izuku is there? He's been in there longer than I like. Kirishima nodded. I'll go get him, teach. And just like that, Kirishima walked out of the classroom. Kirishima was getting worried. He was running through the halls, sweat rolling down from his forehead and eyes wide with fear. He already looked in 5 restrooms on this floor, and Izuku was in none of them. He stood in front of the last restroom, hoping that Izuku was in this one. He opened the door with a shaky hand and walked inside. He called out for his little friend, but no answer. Kirishima put his hand over his mouth and breathed in through his nose. He removed his shaky hand from his mouth and took off in a sprint to the classroom. He threw the classroom door open a little too dramatic. he thought when the door made a too loud noise as it bounced against the wall that scared some of his classmates, and stood panting in the doorway holding the side. "I can't find him," was all he said. Aizawa's eyes went a fraction wider. "What do you mean you can't find him?" he gritted out. Kirishima started to walk into the room with his hand in his hair. "I looked in every restroom on this floor, and he is nowhere." Kirishima started to panic. What if something terrible happened to Izuku, he thought. Aizawa looked around. "Okay everyone, stay calm," Aizawa started. "But we're calm," Kaminari said. Aizawa decided to ignore Kaminari and continued. "Ida, you keep an eye on the class, I need to find my son." And just like that, Aizawa was gone. Everyone looked at Kirishima. What happened? Bakugo decided to speak up first. "Izuku is missing." Aizawa bursts into his husband's classroom. Everyone looked up from their books to look at the tired homeroom teacher, Shota. "What's wrong?" "Hisashi, can I speak to you for a second in the hallway?" "Now," he said when his husband didn't move. Hisashi flinched from his husband's sudden loudness and practically ran outside. Aizawa paced the hallway mumbling, "Shota, what's going on? I've never seen you like this." Aizawa took a deep breath and stepped towards his husband. "Izuku is gone," he stated. Aizawa didn't want to beat around the bush. "What?" Hisashi yelled, which the whole school heard, even the students of 1B who were training outside with Vlad King. The two worried dads were speed walking through the halls towards Nezu's office. Hisashi practically broke his door down when he knocked at it more than once. The two walked into the office after they heard they could come in. Nezu looked at them. "You, what's wrong?" he asked after he saw their distressed states. "Izuku gone," was all they said. After their cryptic way of phrasing what was going on, Aizawa explained it better, and Nezu started to type away at his computer. He motioned for the two pro heroes to come closer and look at his computer. The camera footage has been tampered with, but it was sloppy and forgot a few seconds. Nezu explained and pressed play on the footage. Both men looked at the footage. You could see the hallway and Izuku, who was walking into the restroom. But the screen showed a static screen for a second, and you could see the timestamp move up some minutes, and Nezu pressed pause. "What? What happened?" "I saw nothing," Aizawa said, annoyed. "This was going nowhere. He should be out there looking for his son." "You didn't see?" "Of course you simple-brained humans wouldn't," Nezu said, and went back to his computer. Aizawa was about to hit the mouse, but Hisashi stopped his hand. Nezu put the video in slow motion and paused on a specific time frame. "Look, here." He pointed his paw at the screen, and you could see Izuku and someone turn the corner before the static screen came. Nezu zoomed in on the screen and made the frame better visible. "Someone is walking with him," he said. Aizawa looked closer and squinted his eyes. "That's one of my students," he said, anger bubbling in his voice. Hisashi pushed his husband softly to the side. "What's Uraraka doing with Izuku?" Izuku woke up and his head hurt, so he wanted to touch it with his right hand. But as he lifted his hand, it got stuck on something. He looked down and saw his hand was chained up. After that, he looked frantically around the room. It looked like he was inside some sort cave that had a wooden door in the middle. He himself was sitting on a thin mattress. He could tell it was thin because he could feel the rock-hard floor under him. He started to panic. He wanted his papa or his dad. Tears started to gather in his eyes. "Papa," he wailed, thick tears falling down. Suddenly the door opened, and he saw the shadow of a man in front of him. "Dad," he said with a small voice. "Wrong. Guess again, kid." A man with a hand on his face walked in and leaned down a bit. On instinct, Izuku shifted back only to press himself harder against the stone wall. He whimpered when the scary hand man came closer. He undid the handcuff and yanked Izuku up and dragged him out the room with 4 fingers around his wrist. Izuku was struggling and hitting the man's arm. "Let go off me. You're hurting me," Izuku sobbed. Shigaraki stopped dead in his tracks, fed up with this child's behavior, and smacked Izuku across the face. "Shut up, you useless brat." And just like nothing happened, he started to pull Izuku further down the dark hallway. Izuku, on the other hand, was shocked of what just happened. No one has ever hit him like that. He didn't want it to happen again, so he just followed along with the strange man and didn't say another word. Shigaraki pushed Izuku in a too large chair for the young child, and bound his hands together a little too tight for Izuku's liking and whimpered when he pulled the last knot. Shigaraki smiled at the child's pain and stepped back when the TV screen in the bar flickered on. "Master," Shigaraki greeted. One for All ignored him and looked at Izuku, who cowered in on himself as the man turned his body towards him, but couldn't see a face. "I see you got the child." He looked briefly away, "within the time limit I foresaw." His gruff voice spoke. "Of course we got him in time." A new voice spoke. "Now will you tell us why you had Toga kidnap a fucking child?" The voice said. "The next time you speak to me like that, I will rip your throat out. Understand, Dabai?" One for All said. Dabai grumbled some incoherent words, but answered anyway. I understand. Sir. He spit the last word out and disappeared back into the shadows. As to answer your question, he continued, this child is very beloved by many heroes, even All Might. Shigaraki smiled at One for All statement. So if we hurt the child, we hurt the heroes, he said with his strained voice while scratching his neck. He eyes the boy. Oh, I'm gonna enjoy hurting you, he snickered. Tears gathered in Izuku's eyes, but blinked them away, not wanting to show weakness to these villains. Uraraka sat at her desk. The classroom was dark, except for a lamp above her head that was lit. She didn't know where it came from but decided to not question it, and gulped at the sight in front of her. Aizawa, Hisashi and Nimiri were standing in front of her, and they looked mad. Did I do something wrong? She asked, and instead of speaking, Aizawa turned his computer towards her and showed her the photo of the security footage. She looked at it, not quite understanding it. Aizawa rolled his eyes and Hisashi smacked his hands flat on her desk, which hurt his poor hands, but decided not to show it. Don't play dumb, Uraraka. Where are you going with our son? He asked, narrowing his eyes in an attempt to look intimidating. She looked closer at the photo, and her eyes widened. That's not me, she yelled. Midnight leaned in closer. But it is you, see? She pointed at the photo, and also narrowing her eyes. After Izuku went to the restroom. A few minutes later, you also went to the restroom. Of course, after you finished your test at 10:26 am, Aizawa said, also leaning in closer. Uraraka started to sweat from the interrogation. Her teachers could be intimidating if they wanted to. And it put a lot of pressure on her. Am I right? Aizawa asked in a strict voice, which he had used on Izuku after he ate all of his Halloween candy, and denied it. Yes, she sputtered out. Aha. So you kidnapped Izuku? Hisashi yelled. What? No, I didn't kidnap anyone. She yelled, desperate. Then why were you gone for the time span of 15 minutes? Aizawa questioned, raising his voice at the end. I ran into Mina on my way back here, and we started talking about the test, she said. The teachers looked skeptical at her, so she tried to prove her innocence. She said she was on her way to give some papers to Hatsum for some costume updates, she yelled. The other teachers looked at Aizawa for confirmation, if Mina indeed left his classroom. What? A lot of children left for some things after they handed in their tests, he deadpan. Hisashi looked at no one in particular and said, bring in Mina Eshido. Mina sat in the same chair and looked around. Why is it so dark in here? She questioned with her arms crossed over her chest. Did you run into Uraraka after she went to the restroom? Midnight questioned. Cool. Is this an interrogation? Like in those cool police action movies? She said, exited and sitting up straighter to play their game, and became all serious. What if I ran into her? She asked, raising her eyebrows. I'll tell you for the small price if you can guarantee me that I passed on the test we just made. Her teachers looked at her questionable. Mina. This isn't a game, Aizawa begun. Our son's life is at stake. Present Mike yelled at her, desperation in his voice. Oh, okay, yeah, I ran into her before I dropped off something at Hatsum, she said with a kind smile. The teachers looked at each other. Okay, so if Uraraka didn't kidnap Izu, then who did, and why do they look like her? Aizawa asked the other two. Maybe Ochako has an evil twin sister, Mina said, while her hands did a spooky gesture. Wah, Aizawa began, but was cut off as the lights sprung to live in the classroom, and a worried Kirishima and an irritated Bakugo stood now inside the classroom. We are wasting valuable time here. This interrogation thing is just a waste of time. We need to look for Izuku instead of playing detective, Kirishima said, waving his arms around in desperation. You can come with us, or cause we're gonna look for him ourselves, Bakugo said, while gritting his teeth. The teachers looked at each other and looked down in shame. Izuku could be hurt right now, and they were wasting time here on Mina, of course, because they really needed to speak to Uraraka because of the camera footage. Aizawa was walking towards the door of his classroom. Then let's go and find my son. Izuku sat still, tied up in a way to big chair, but was now in a different room. It had brick walls that were covered with some blood spatters, and a concrete floor with here and there hole in. Izuku looked around. His wrists were starting to hurt because of the ropes. He could see some red lines starting to form where they were rubbing against his skin. He sat there for a few more minutes when the door opened, and a two-colored masked villain stepped inside the room and walked up to him. Izuku shrunk back as the villain leaned close to him. Why do I have to start to torture him? Yes, I have some ideas, Twice spoke. Izuku looked weird at him. He said he didn't want to hurt him, but then immediately said he wanted to do it. Izuku's brain started to hurt. Villains are weird. Please, don't hurt me, he said. His voice came out smaller than he had thought. Awa, how can I hurt someone as cute as him? How about with the hammer first? Twice said, changing his voice a little. Izuku winced as he heard the word hammer fall out of the villain's mouth. Twice looked around and picked the hammer up from the table that was standing in the room with some torture equipment on top of it. Twice twirled the hammer in his hand, put the hammer above his shoulder ready to swing it down. Izuku watched in fear as the thing came down, closing his eyes and preparing himself for the pain, but it never came. "I can't do this," Twice yelled, and let the hammer drop to the ground. Izuku let out a sigh of relief, and after a few seconds the door flew open, and a girl with blonde hair walked in and dragged Twice to the door. Gave him a little push so he was out of the room, and she locked the door. "My turn," she said, walking over to the green-haired boy. "This is going to be fun. I can't wait to see your blood." "Izuku," she said, exited and singing his name at the end. Now Izuku let his tears fall down, wishing that his dad or papa would find him soon. 𝗬𝗲𝗺 sat on the wore-down couch with his arms crossed. Yep, the big bad 𝗬𝗲𝗺 was brooding like a child. He didn't look up when Twice threw himself onto the couch next to him. "What did you do to him?" He just asked. "Nothing. I wanted to hit him with the hammer so badly," Twice said. "So I take that you didn't hurt him, I guess, since you said wanted," 𝗬𝗲𝗺 said, holding his hand up with his palm to the ceiling. "Yeah, Toga dragged me out of the room," Twice said, now sitting up in the couch. "So the kid's gonna have some cuts," 𝗬𝗲𝗺 stated. "Yep, so Tamura said you could have some fun after Toga. If you like," Twice said, adding the last 3 words of his own, "probably." 𝗬𝗲𝗺 stood up suddenly. "I may be a villain, but I'm also human, and I am not going to torture a fucking 5-year-old. He stormed off to his room in the bar. The kid reminded him too much of Shoto when he was little. He pulled his lip up in disgust before he slammed his door shut. Yeah, he may not like heroes that much, but dragging some innocent fucking kid in this mess was fucked up. Believe him when he says that he still wants to destroy Endeavor. But this was crossing a line. A very dangerous line to him. He had read the file on the kid, of course. He's no amateur. All for one did make this plan. So he had given them all the file on the kid to show them who his parents were, and the heroes he was close with. The file also consisted some photos that were taken with some pro heroes that the boy was close with. Most of them were with All Might. That's probably why the kid became a target in the first place, 𝗬𝗲𝗺 thought. He remembered a part in the file where the parents of the kid had died in a fire and was put into a foster home until the 2 pro heroes adopted him. 𝗬𝗲𝗺 felt bad for the kid, honestly. He probably had 2 loving parents that wanted to see their son grow up into a good environment and have a great life. 𝗬𝗲𝗺 could relate himself to the kid. He too did lose his parents. Yeah, maybe not in the exact same way, but it felt the same. He walked over to his closet, opened the door and walked inside and pulled on the string to light the closet on the inside. He immediately found what he was looking for and picked the box up from the second shelf. He blew the dust off of it and put it on his desk, which was beside the closet. 𝗬𝗺𝗺 opened the box, which was halfway filled with burner phones, which were for situations like this well most of the time, and dialed a number he had memorized from years of calling it ring ring. Ring after the third ring of the same voice picked up like with all the other calls, "Hello." Normally 𝗬𝗺𝗺 wouldn't say anything, just listen to his younger brother say hello for a few times to see if he was still doing okay or something. "Don't judge him before hanging up." "Shoto Todoroki," 𝗬𝗺𝗺 said. "Yes, who is this?" Todoroki said. "You looking for the green-haired boy?" he asked. 𝗬𝗺𝗺 could hear other people talk, while Shoto covered the speaker to say something, probably the other heroes. 𝗬𝗺𝗺 thought with the heroes. Todoroki excused himself from the others when his phone rang. He looked at the number. It was unknown. He has been having a few phone calls of where the number was unknown. He only heard breathing, so he mostly thought they butt dialed him or something, but picked up anyway. "Hello," he said loud and clear, so the other person could hear him hopefully. It was silent for a few seconds before a gruff voice answered by saying his name, Shoto Todoroki. He was confused. Shinso must have seen something was wrong, even though it's hard to read the bi-colored boy's face. Sometimes. "Yes, who is this?" he asked while Shinso dragged him back over to the others. "You looking for the green-haired boy?" the man on the phone asked, and Shoto's eyes went wide for a second. He covered the speaker and looked at Aizawa. "Someone is asking if I'm looking for a green-haired boy," Todoroki said, and Aizawa walked over and took his phone without hesitation. "Who is this?" he asked in his calm voice. "We don't have time for this. If you want to see the kid again, come to this address," the voice said. Aizawa didn't need to write the address down. "You wanna know why?" "Because this street is on his patrol route. Why should I belie?" They hung up, Aizawa said, handing Todoroki his phone back. "Who was that?" Kirishima asked. "I don't know, but they gave me an address." "Izuku might be there," Aizawa said, looking at his husband. "Well then, what are we waiting for?" Bakugo yelled. "We have to be careful. What if it's a trap?" Denki asked. "Well, we just have to risk it," Hisashi said. Aizawa turned to his husband. "Go and alert the police. Request Detective Tsukachi. Take Kaminari and Todoroki with you. And get the other heroes as well. God knows, we could use the extra backup, Aizawa ordered. Hisashi gave a kiss on his husband's cheek. Get our son back, Aizawa, he said. I won't come back without him. Aizawa nodded his head, while Hisashi turned around and ran out of the room with Kaminari and Todoroki on his heel. Bakugo, Kirishima and Aizawa were behind a wall on the opposite side of the building where they had said Izuku was. Don't you think we need to wait for the extra backup or something? Kirishima asked. We don't need backup. I'll kill these goddamn extras myself if Izuku is in there, Bakugo yelled in his usual tone. Calm down, Aizawa said. What are we doing here, cowering behind a fucking wall? Well, we could be going in there already and kill those villains, Bakugo yelled again. How about we make a plan first, Aizawa suggests. We don't need a plan. See, the door is right fucking there. Ready for us to break it down into pieces. Kirishima looked at his friend. We can't go and fight first, ask questions later kinda thing. We need to be rational about this, he said, crossing his arms. You damn shitty hair. I'm not going to ask anyone questions. I'm gonna beat the shit out of them, and then move on to the next one, Bakugo said, while he let some explosions come off his hands. While you two problem children were yapping at each other, I came up with a decent kind of plan, Aizawa said, standing up from his crouched position he was in. Well, tell us, you caterpillar, Bakugo said, also crouching down. Shigaraki just came out of the room where Izuku was, cleaning his hands with an old rag. When he went over to the others, he waved a disc in front of them. What's that? Dabai asked, looking up from his phone. Oh, nothing. Just some blackmail for the heroes, to let them see what's happening with their precious child, Shigaraki laughed with his crispy voice. It was silent for a minute, until Dabai said that he was going to check if the kid was still alive. He opened the door and Izuku immediately flinched back, afraid that he was going to get hurt again. He locked the door and walked over to Izuku. Hey, don't worry, I'm not here to hurt you, he said. Izuku stayed silent. The previous man had a kick or something whenever he screamed. Dabai crouched down and took Izuku's face between his hand and turned it from side to side. He looked relieved from Izuku's perspective. They didn't massacre you too badly. Thank God. He said the last two words in a whisper. Why are you concerned about me? Izuku decided to speak up. Because I don't like it when grown-ass adults hit children for fun, Dabai stated. Why? Izuku questioned. Believe me, kid, been there, done that. I didn't like it for shit, he said with a sigh while grabbing a handkerchief from his pocket and wet it at the sink in the corner of the room and came back to tend the child's hurt face. I'm sorry your parents did that to you, Izuku said, while he winced when Dabai pressed a certain cut on his jaw. Correction. Parent. Dad is an asshole, Izuku giggled, which made Dabai smile a little. Dabai looked around for a trash can to dump the bloodied handkerchief in it. When he didn't see one, he pulled his eyebrows up for a second before lowering them back and shrugging and threw it behind his shoulder and landed on the floor behind him. Okay, kid. I have to go now, he began. No, please stay. I don't like the others, Izuku began, but Dabai cut him off, even though Izuku cut him off first. Don't worry, kid, your dad, or some other hero, will be here soon to save you. He stood up, ready to walk back out. How do you know? The kid asked, looking down. Just trust me, kid. All right. He opened the door, but paused for a second when he heard Izuku speak up again. Okay, I trust you. It was small, but he heard it. Dabai closed the door behind him and leaned against the door for a second. Then, for the second time that night, Dabai smiled. Shota explained the plan to his two students. Kirishima was going to attract the attention of some villain, and once the attention was on the front building, Kirishima would come to them, and then they would search the building together. Aizawa didn't want to put his students in unnecessary danger. And Kirishima had just the perfect plan. He's going to just knock on the door, just like the other pro heroes had done when they saved Bakugo a year ago. He only hoped the villains would fall for it again. And he was still in his civilian clothes, so they would probably recognize him, right? But fuck that, right now they needed to save Izuku now. He walked up to the old building. I guess if you're a villain you don't have the money for a good hideout. I mean, I can literally come and knock on their door. Oh well, Kirishima thought as he walked up to the door and inspecting the old building. Knock knock. He waited and waited. As soon as that door opens, he's gonna attack. The door opened, and bam, Kirishima looks down at the unconscious body of Twice. The rest of the villains must have heard the yelp and could come any moment, so he ran around the back and immediately saw his teacher and best friend and gave them a thumbs up and went through a window inside. Once they were inside, Eraser looked around, and it looked like they were in some sort of wine cellar given the big wine barrels neatly placed in 2 rows. Stay behind me, Aizawa said as they walked to the door. His students nodded and followed. Once Eraser stepped into the hallway and deemed it safe, he motioned for the 2 others to follow. Well, what now? Bakugo yelled. Aizawa ignored him and looked around the hallway when his eye caught a vent on the wall and smiled under his capture weapon. Perfect, follow me. Twice Toga yells as she sees his body laying by the open door. She kneeled next to him and looked up at Shigaraki, who followed after she yelled. She looked at him with an angry expression. The hell you looking at me like that? It's not like I knocked the idiot out cold, he said, crossing his arms over each other. Well, someone certainly did, she snarled. Shigaraki's eyes went wide. That brat. He stalked back to the common room and looking back at the cameras. Dabai looked up from his phone with a bored expression. What happened? To which Shigaraki snarled. Someone knocked the idiot out by the front door, but I don't see any intruders on the cameras. He looked puzzled back at the camera. Well, maybe it were some kids playing pranks. Anyway, who cares, it's just twice after all. Dabai looked back at his phone. I guess you're right. But I'm going to the brat just to make sure he's still there, he said while walking away. Shigaraki walked through the hallways until he reached his destination. He looked around before opening the door and smiled when he saw the trembling child in his chair. You're still here, he stated. Izuku looked up at him with a determined face, but Shigaraki could see the fear in his eyes. Where else would I be, he said. I thought your hero friends would have already come to get you. But I guess they don't care about some weakling like you. Shigaraki smirked. I'm not weak, Izuku said, while biting back a sob. He couldn't prove this villain right by crying in front of him. Shigaraki stalked closer to the child and bent down to his eye level. You are weak. You can't even control your quirk that good. That's worse than being quirkless. Child, admit it, you have a weak quirk. Nothing worth. Izuku looked down, squeezing his eyes shut, while his tears streamed down his cheek in complete silence. Shigaraki smiled perfect, and then stood up and walked back out of the room. When he was in the hall, he started walking but stopped in his tracks when he heard something. He looked around but didn't see anyone, so he just walked away. Once Aizawa is sure the villain is gone, he dropped out of the vent, followed by Kirishima and Bakugo. Thank God. I thought hand fetish dude would never leave my back and knees hurt from that damn small space, Bakugo complained. Yeah, same bro, Kirishima said, and then followed their teacher to the door. Aizawa said nothing as he stood for the room he knew Izuku was in. He didn't want to know what they did to his son. He was sure once he saw what they did, he couldn't stop himself from murdering every villain in this building. Oh God, he started to sound like Bakugo. Eraserhead? Kirishima now stood next to him. Yeah. Sorry, come. Aizawa pulled on the door handle, and the door opened. That idiot forgot to lock the door, Aizawa thought to himself, and then he locked eyes with his son. Aizawa didn't waste a second and bolted over to him. He had blood trickling down his face, probably from a head wound. He was gagged with a white cloth and was restrained. His hands behind the chair and his feet loose, thank God. Kirishima ran over and undid his hands while Aizawa pulled the white cloth away. The first thing they heard was a sob coming from his lips, and he threw his little arms around his dad's neck. SHH, I'm here, Izu, Aizawa cooed at him. They heard sirens from above. Some fighting, so they went upstairs, knowing it was safe that reinforcement had arrived. It took some turns to find the stairs to go up, but they did, and the heroes had caught most of the villains. Aizawa pulled Izuku closer to him, and Izuku tightens his grip around his neck in return. Tsukachi walked up to him. He had a small notebook in his hand that he slapped on his other hand in fluid motions. Eraserhead. He nodded at the hero and continued. We caught most off the villains that were here. Aizawa cut him off. Why do I know there's gonna be a but or expect? He managed to keep the whine out of his voice and kept it monotone. Tsukachi gave an awkward smile. The latter. Expect for Dabai, Shigaraki, Toga, and twice got away, probably through the warp gate of Kurogiri, he stated. So who did you catch from the League? Bakugo asked with his arms crossed and that scowl on his face. Tsukachi looked at Eraserhead, who just rolled his eyes and nodded. Well, we have Mr. Compress and Spinner, the two most known of the group, and some less known villain that were there, the detective stated. Okay, thank you, detective, for the information, but I'm gonna bring my son to an ambulance now. Aizawa said, of course. Take care, little guy, Tsukachi said, knowing that the kid wasn't going to answer him, but Aizawa gave him a firm nod in return and walked off. Izuku. A loud voice came just as Aizawa put him down on the stretcher. Zashi, Aizawa said with a small smile. Papa, Izuku said in a cry voice. Hizashi sat down on the stretcher and hugged his son, tears streaming down his face. It was a very sentimental reunion for the family. Hizashi wanted to drive with the ambulance to the hospital, while Aizawa suggested to drive Bakugo and Kirishima back to the dorm building. He dropped them off and went back to the hospital himself. His husband had sent him the room number he was in with Izuku. He walked through the halls of the hospital, looking at the numbers of the rooms, when he saw two familiar faces. What are you doing here? He said with an annoyed tone. Oh, come on, 𝗧𝗵𝗲. We just wanted to see our favorite nephew Midnight whined. You only have one nephew. So I don't think favoritism is not at play here. He said, bored. We just came to see young Izuku, Aizawa. But we waited for you. You know, Yagi said with a light tone in his voice. So he doesn't upset the man. All right. But can you give me and Zashi like 10 minutes alone? He asked. They both bowed and nodded with a smile on their faces. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 walked in the room and saw his husband on the bed, holding Izuku in his lap and cuddling with him. Izuku was sleeping, while Hisashi was combing his fingers through his hair. Aizawa stepped up to the bed and gave his husband a kiss. How is he? Aizawa said while sitting down on the hospital bed close to the two most important people in the world for him. He got some bruising on his wrists and a nasty head wound. No further physical damage, but emotionally. I don't know, Shu. He wouldn't let me go, afraid that they would come back. I've been holding him since the ambulance ride here. Hisashi stopped for a second and looked back up at his husband with teary eyes. They said some things to him. That will forever be in his head. How could they say things like that? To a fucking 5-year-old Hisashi let out a sob and pulled Izuku closer to his chest. I know these things they said will forever be in his head, Zashi. But we will be there to get him through it all right. These assholes did some pretty fucked up things to our son. They will pay for their actions, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 said, biting his lip in anger. His eyes were glassy while looking at his husband. Hisashi grabbed his hand and squeezed it. You're right. We'll be there for him, Shu. Yagi and Midnight came in the room. Izuku had woken up by the time they stood at his bedside. They talked for a bit, the conversation lulling Izuku back to sleep. After a few more minutes, the two heroes left so the family could rest. The next day Izuku could go back home. He didn't talk much, but he didn't let his papa go clinging to him like a baby koala. Hisashi didn't mind. They had to go back to school to teach their classes and proposed for one of Izuku's uncles aunts to come babysit him. But that turned out in Izuku clinging to Hisashi with many tears and an almost panic attack from the boy, so they decided to bring him to school. And figured it was best to stay with his papa for the time being. His students didn't see, or if they saw didn't mention the sleeping kid in their teacher's arms. When he was standing at the front, he put Izuku in his chair to rest, and when he was awake stood behind Hisashi's leg, holding on tight. Izuku didn't go to the toilet alone anymore. Hisashi went with him on his request. Aizawa's class asked for the boy, and if he was all right. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 explained that his wounds were treated properly, and that they were managing, and that they would see him in Hisashi's class. When the time eventually came to go to his class, some students like Kirishima, Bakugo, and Uraraka immediately came to Izuku's side to see if he was doing okay. Izu, how are you holding up? Kirishima said, crouching down. I'm all right, he said, hiding behind his papa's leg. Kirishima looked up at his teacher, who gave him a sympathetic smile. But then Izuku saw Uraraka, and he scrambled back, what caused him to fall on his butt and cover his face with his hands, and his breath caught up a notch. Hisashi turned around and kneeled down in front of Izuku. Hey, baby, it's okay. Nothing's going to happen. This is the real Uraraka. Izuku scrambled forward and clung to Hisashi like a lifeline. I'm sorry. I will drop him off at Eraserhead for now, Hisashi said, while standing up and walking away. Great, now he's scared of our class. Thanks, Uraraka, 𝗵𝗲 said from his desk, while leaning on his hand. Hey, it's not her fault. Mina called from her desk on the other side of the classroom. It's not my fault that Toga took my blood during training camp, Uraraka said with her eyes cast down. Yeah, maybe you should have defended yourselves better. 𝗵𝗲 rolled his eyes at her. But you're a girl, so I can't really blame you, I guess, he said with a smirk on his face. What did you say, grape fuck? Bakugo screamed at him. 𝗵𝗲 stood up on his chair ready to bolt. Kirishima stood in front of Bakugo. In a second, Bakubro calmed down. Jiru stood up and crossed her arms. No, let him be. I think he deserves to get his ass kicked for a change, she said, her eyes narrowing. Ida also stood up. As your class rep, I command you all to stop, and to wait for our teacher to return. Are you standing on that pervert's side now? 𝗧𝗵𝗲 butted in. No, I do not pick sides. I'm just trying to keep the peace before we all do something we regret here, Ida said, walking over to the middle while waving his arms. And just like that, a whole commotion broke out in class. 𝗵𝗲 said something offending to Jiru, and Bakugo pushed Kirishima out of the way and launched at him. Hisashi returned to his classroom, only to see Bakugo running after 𝗵𝗲. Ida was in an argument with 𝗧𝗏, and Jiru and Kaminari joined in at some time, backing his friends up. Mina was hugging Uraraka, who was crying, and the rest of the class was enjoying the commotion. Stew up! He yelled, and just like you put a video on pause, everyone stopped with what they were doing. What the hell is going on here? He asked while looking at his students. And then everyone started talking through each other. He pinched the bridge of his nose and sighed, and just like that the class became silent again. One argument led to another. Sir, we're sorry. Momo said she wasn't involved in the class commotion, but decided to speak up as first. All right, what happened? He said, sitting down in his chair. Kirishima explained how it started, and sometimes someone took over to explain it better. And that's when you walked in, sir, Kirishima finished. Okay, is it fixed now what you were fighting over? He said, looking over at his class. Yes, Mina said immediately, not wanting to trouble their teacher anymore. Before anyone could say something, the bell rang, signaling that the day has ended. The Baka squad ran up to Mina. Why did you say yes? Zero said, hanging his arm around her neck. Yeah. We resolved shit, Bakugo said, putting his hands in his pockets and walking ahead. Yamada-sensei already has so much he needs to worry about. He doesn't need us making it more. Mina said, shrugging her shoulders, as it was the most simple thing in the world, and headed back to the dorms. Back at the hero family house, Izuku sat on the couch, looking at a TV show, while his parents were in the kitchen. Hisashi was drinking tea, while his husband was drinking coffee. I think it's best if we put him a therapy, Hisashi said out of nowhere. What? Where does this come from? Shota said, while putting his coffee mug down on the counter and crossing his arms. Today in class, before I brought him to you, he got scared of Uraraka. I think he thought she was Toga or something. Then when I came back, Wano was fighting about it or something. I don't know Shu what to do anymore. And he doesn't let go of me anymore. I mean, not that I care. But he can't keep doing this. What? No, when he has to go back to school, I can't come with him. Hisashi said, putting his hands over his face. Shota came closer and pulled his husband's hands away from his face and held onto them. Hey, calm down. We'll figure this out together. Okay, Shota said, kissing his husband on the lips. Okay, Hisashi said, his voice dropping and hugging his husband. The hug lasted for a while, and when they broke apart, Shota gave him a soft smile. Hisashi smiled back and looked over at the couch to see Izuku asleep. Awa, look, Shu, he's asleep, Shota smiled at his husband. He's going to be okay.